They're here. His cell phone rang, playing Pharrell's Happy. It was Julie.
Danny, are you hearing all this?
Her voice contained anxiety. Yeah, they're over here too. I'm looking down my street now, but I don't see anything.
I saw a cop car go by here earlier.
Danny stuck his hand in his pocket. Where are you?
I'm in the front yard. There are some neighbors out. We're all looking to see where the police went.
Fear rose inside him. Julie, you need to get inside.
What? Why? What's going on?
Static interrupted the line briefly. Julie, can you hear me? Danny was shouting. He knew if it wasn't safe for him to be outside, it certainly wasn't safe for her.
I can hear you. Now, what were you saying?
Danny paced. Julie lived 3 streets over on Arrow. Julie, trust me, you need to go inside. Do it now. She laughed.
Are you worried about me, Danny? Come on. It's just police sirens.
A flash of light made him look up. A large blue orb streaked across the cloudy sky from behind his house, passing over and off toward the railroad tracks. Shoot! His mouth hung open and he took off running. Julie, get inside now! He was around the corner and in full-out sprint nearly to her street. The light pulsed around him like lightning on a dark night. He skidded as he turned the next corner. He could see her standing in her front yard looking up, still holding the phone to her ear. Julie! She turned and saw him running toward her. When he reached her, he grabbed her hand and pulled her to the front door. Danny, what the heck? She protested as he forced her inside. He went in after her and turned to lock the door. Close the curtains. He went around her house, pulling down blinds. Where's your mom? She's at work. Danny, you're acting like a lunatic. Did you see that light? What was that out there? Call her and tell her to stay put. Tell her not to go outside. It isn't safe. He peeked through the blinds. Another large blue orb passed overhead, slower than the first. Its light was pulsing. The thing was huge, but it made no sound. He called Jay. Hey, man, did you see that? Tell me you saw it. Jay was freaking out.
I saw it, man. It just passed over. Your grandpa wasn't kidding. This shit's for reals.
We need to check the news. There's got to be something on the news right now. He looked around for the remote to Julie's TV. Julie was on her phone talking to her mom when the television came on. A special report was airing from KSAT 12. The anchor went to a live feed from an on-site reporter who stood outside of City Hall.
Strange lights above Schertz are being reported in the last half hour. 2 were caught on camera by local residents.
The reporter cut to the B-roll showing the orbs streaking across the sky.
No report from the military if this is part of some training exercise. In fact, KSAT contacted Randolph Air Force Base directly to speak to a representative and were told they have no comment. Strangely, we were given orders instead to get inside the nearest building and stay put.
How stupid are they? Danny looked at the screen in disgust. They were told straight out to get inside, and look at them, standing outside doing a report. He walked back to the blinds and looked out. What he saw sent him into a panic. Cold sweat covered the back of his neck. What's wrong, Danny? Julie stood behind him, trying to look over his shoulder. She finally saw it. Where her neighbors stood only 10 or 15 minutes ago, now were only a pile of clothes. Oh my God, Jay, it's Farley all over again. He still had his friend on speaker. I don't understand. They were just there. Why would they take off their clothes and leave them out there like that? Is that what people do from New York? Julie asked Danny. From New York? What do you mean? They just moved here last month. Danny couldn't see any of the other people who'd been standing out there when he ran up, but he didn't see any other piles of clothes either. Jay, I think we all need to be together. Can you get over here to Julie's?
What? No way. I'm not going outside. Are you crazy?
Jay was beyond scared. We'll meet you halfway. Come get us. Don't leave me hanging out there, man. Danny hung up, giving Jay no choice. He grabbed Julie's hand. Come on, we have to make a run for it. Hybrids. Harvest Trilogy Volume 2. Written by Michelle E. Gwynn. Narrated by Lawrence D. Yaklin. From the author. Hybrids continues the theme from Book 1 in the Harvest Trilogy. The series, inspired by a true event that occurred in January of 1995, reported to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, in 2011. It is something I'll never forget and is described in detail in Harvest. The sightings described in the beginning of Hybrids are all true accounts, and all but one can be found on the MUFON website under the sightings in Schertz. The account not recorded was shared with me by a dear friend who, upon hearing my story, told me a tale difficult to believe, but happened to her, her little brother, and nephew on October 31st, 1979. I'm fascinated by stories of alien encounters and UFO sightings, mostly because I know from first-hand experience that we are, indeed, not alone in this universe. Hybrids. A secret buried deep beneath the Samuel Clemens football field has broken free from its tomb, and the residents of the small town of Schertz, Texas, are in danger. Government-sanctioned torture and experiments have led to a breakthrough in medical science, one that the citizens of Schertz are not even aware they've participated in by being human guinea pigs. Worse, the source of the serum, known as cellulose, created by greedy local community leaders, is angry and seeking revenge. When alien crafts show up to reclaim their own, Schertz becomes a war zone cut off from the world by the very government that caused it to be targeted in the first place. Those who sought to profit through vivisection are being held accountable, while those forever changed by alien DNA meet their kin. Time is running out for the people of Schertz. Disclaimer. Hybrids is a work of fiction by Michelle E. Gwynn. Any resemblance to persons living or dead is strictly coincidental. Locations listed are real, however, their relation to events in this story are fictitious. This work is protected by copyright and may not be copied, downloaded, or otherwise sold, shared, or offered for free without the express consent of the author, Michelle E. Gwynn. Any attempt to do so will be treated as a violation of copyright and prosecuted. No aliens were harmed in the writing of this story. Cover created by M. Gwynn. Image credit copyright Alex Malikoff. Dreamstime.com. File ID 428-72508. License royalty free, all rights reserved. Prologue. May 15, 1962. The screams were the loudest and most maniacal sounds Sergeant Trent Wilkins had ever heard. Assigned to guard the doors to the 12th Air Training Command's underground bunker, located approximately 2 miles northwest of Randolph Air Force Base, Texas, Wilkins had not been given any specifics, nor had he asked. He just followed orders, and his orders were to stand guard from 2300 hours till 700, and let in only 3 authorized personnel on the list. With the steel doors closed, no one beyond the field could hear those screams. Screams that sounded like something out of a nightmare, like they came from an animal, but no animal he'd ever encountered before. The sounds assaulted his ears and scraped the inside of his skull as Dr. Andrei Troyevsky and Colonel Lewis Reed exited those steel doors and headed up the ramp toward the Jeep parked in the center of what was otherwise a fallow field. Cows lowed in the distance, answering those screams that faded off as the doors automatically closed behind the departed men. Wilkins was relieved when the lock clicked shut and he could no longer easily detect the otherworldly screeching. Other than the frightening noises from within, the job was easy. He could smoke his cigarettes, pee in the field, and he was allowed 1 30-minute break to eat. As long as no one went in that wasn't on the list, and no one left who wasn't on the list, his job was complete. The list changed nightly with only a few variations in authorized military personnel, but the demands of the post stayed the same. Wilkins had been on this detail for 3 months, and not much had changed. If he could finish out his military contract before his out-processing back into civilian life pulling this detail, his remaining time would be a cakewalk. He lit a Marlboro as the Jeep pulled away and took a long drag. Only Dr. Parker remained inside the bunker. How he could stand those screams, being so close to whatever was going on in there, he didn't know. Ben Parker was in his 50s with silvery hair, what little he had, and wore a stern countenance. On the few occasions he'd seen him, Parker had not acknowledged the sergeant beyond flashing his ID, and he always looked 10 years older when he left in the morning. Wilkins leaned up against the concrete frame built 2 stories into the ground that surrounded the 10-inch thick steel doors. His cigarette burned down slowly between his fingers as he let his eyelids droop. The peaceful sounds, crickets chirping, a light breeze in the trees, and the cows out in the neighboring field created a tranquil state that lulled him into a light doze. Troyevsky and Colonel Reed wouldn't return this night. Once someone left during a shift, they were finished, so he wasn't worried about being caught sleeping on duty. Wilkins perfected the art of dozing while standing guard. It was how he spent most nights. This one was no different, until a loud banging from inside the steel doors jerked him to attention. Muffled screams barely discernible through the 10-inch thick steel mingled with the frantic pounding. "Open the door!" Muffled, the words reached his ears. Wilkins cocked his M14 and aimed at the doors. "Dr. Parker, are you okay, sir?" "Open the door, soldier! Open the door!" More pounding and the sound of scraping assaulted his ears. Wilkins felt increasingly uneasy and panicked, but tried to remain calm. "Sir, you have to use your key, sir. I don't have a key to open this door. I'm not authorized. Use your key and open the door slowly. I'm armed, and I won't stand down until I'm assured you're all right." Words gave way to unearthly screams. The sounds of fists pounding on the inside of the door gave way to a hideous scraping like fingernails on metal. Then a loud bang that sounded like a body slamming into the right-hand door caused both to shudder and actually shake the concrete jamb. Silence. "Dr. Parker!" Sergeant Wilkins called. No answer. "Doc! Doc! Doc!" Wilkins felt a sick sense of horror. Something had happened to Dr. Parker, and he couldn't help him. Couldn't get inside the doors or leave his post to call for help. Damn it! He paced back and forth, never lowering his rifle from quick aim at the doors. There was more than an hour left until daylight and the arrival of the next shift of authorized personnel. He'd have to wait. He had no choice. "Doc!" Wilkins kept calling for Parker until his voice grew hoarse. Time crawled slowly by as he kept trying to elicit a response from inside the bunker. Sweat trickled into his eyes and his heart raced. Finally, the horizon began to show the telltale signs of dawn, and the rumble of a jeep moving closer alerted his ears. He didn't know how long he'd been standing facing the doors, rifle aimed, calling the doctor's name, but it felt like an eternity. Tech Sergeant John J. House pulled up roughly 12 feet from the incline that led down to the bunker. He left the keys in the ignition for Wilkins. The guards relayed the military vehicle back and forth from the base so as to keep the field clear and inconspicuous to anyone who drove by during the day. Between the overgrown brush and the entryway being built below ground level, the military presence on the land was undetectable. The only giveaway was the fence surrounding the acreage that had signs stating, "Leased property of the U.S. government. Keep out." House grabbed his pack that contained his lunch and several canteens of water. It got hot out in the field, and a man could sweat off his body weight in the middle of May in Texas. He slipped his arms through the strap of his M14 and headed off down the ramp. He immediately noticed Wilkins standing with his back to him and his rifle aimed at the doors. "Wilkins, what the hell are you doing?" House stopped, dropped his pack, and swung his rifle into position, aiming towards the sergeant and those double doors. His senses were on immediate alert. "Sarge!" a hoarse voice asked. Wilkins looked over his shoulder, and the haunted look in his eyes set off alarm bells in House's head. "What happened, Trent? What's going on?" House kept his voice calm, waiting. "Dr. Parker, the doc, man. He was screaming and banging on the door. Kept shouting for me to open the door. I tried to tell him I don't have a key, but he kept screaming at me." "Where's the colonel and Troyevsky?" "They left earlier. Only the doc was inside." Wilkins turned back toward the doors. "Did he come out?" House continued to try to assess what happened. "No, he just stopped screaming." "How long ago?" "Dunno, Sarge. Maybe an hour ago, maybe a little more." Wilkins' voice cracked. House knew this was serious. He'd have to inform the colonel right away. "Wilkins, stay on guard until I get back. I have to go back to base and get help. When the next shift comes, don't let anyone in. You copy?" "Copy, sir." House ran back up the ramp, jumped into the Jeep, and sped out like a bat out of hell back to base. Chapter 1. The field, usually devoid of any visible presence, was overrun the morning of May 16, 1962, with military trucks and jeeps, and personnel that included an explosives expert, soldiers with heavy artillery, and a crew in hazmat suits. Standing away from the group were Colonel Reed, Dr. Troyevsky, one 3-star general, and 2 men in dark business suits. Colonel Reed stood taller than the group and had eyes like a hawk. They missed nothing. The general was a barrel-chested man with droopy jowls and eyebrows that sat heavily above his eyes as if his thoughts carried weight. Troyevsky had a square jaw, deep-set eyes, and thick hands. His graying blond hair was thinning at the top. His accent indicated a Slavic ancestry. The men in civilian suits were an oddity among all the military regalia. The first one had dark hair slicked back with hair gel, and his thin, stooped shoulders looked swallowed up inside his blazer. The other suit was older, harder looking, and had a scar that ran vertically over the right side of his lips. He appeared haggard. Both were smoking cigarettes down to the butts. They were speaking quietly amongst themselves, and their expressions were dour. Sergeant Wilkins sat off to one side on the back of the Jeep. He would normally have driven away at the end of his shift, but his shift had yet to end. He'd been debriefed and then debriefed again about what happened and what he knew. Sergeant House was also interviewed. However, his knowledge was considered after the fact and not relevant. It was Wilkins that had the full attention of the high-ranking group, now speaking in hushed tones 20 feet away. The way they kept glancing back at him made him nervous. It surely wasn't good. Maybe they blamed him for the incident, but how could they? He had no control over what went on inside that bunker, and no authority or key in which to enter in case of emergency. Still, being the object of their constant attention seemed to say otherwise. As he waited and watched, soldiers began surrounding the ramped entryway down into the bunker. 2 carried bazookas, and 3 rolled a heavy machine gun mounted on a platform smack in the middle of the ramp facing the steel doors. As they settled into place, ready to blast anything that moved, and with nothing short of a small army, the explosives expert donned a blast suit and squatted down to assemble what appeared to be a timer device attached to a black box containing God knows what. "Overkill, anyone?" Wilkins thought. That sure seems like a lot of hoopla to just go inside and pull the dock out. Wilkins looked at House in bewilderment. What the hell is in there anyway? "That's filed under Need to Know, and you don't need to know, Wilkins." House cut him off quickly, looking sideways at the group with Colonel Reed, and then back to Wilkins. His look said, "Be quiet, you fool." Trent looked down and away, taking the hint. A captain, obviously in charge of the soldiers, walked toward the central group. He stopped, saluted both the general and the colonel, and then announced, "Everything's in place. We're ready on your command, sir." This last was directed at Colonel Reed. Colonel Reed gave a nod, and the captain returned to the top of the ramp. He gestured to one soldier armed with a .45 handgun and an M14, who began to escort the soldier with the explosive device down to the doors of the bunker. The escort pulled a key out of his pocket and inserted it into the large lock that kept the steel doors impregnable. The silence in the field was so pronounced that the click of the tumblers snapping into place seemed as loud as gunshots. Everyone watched, alert, ready to react at a moment's notice. The soldier waited as the lock released and one of the 2 doors inched open. He placed his left hand on the door's edge, taking aim into the darkness with his right hand. Satisfied that nothing was immediately on the other side, he stepped back slightly to the side, making room for the other soldier who carried the explosive. As he walked inside the door, The escort simultaneously holstered his handgun and hoisted his rifle, aiming after that hazmat suit that seemed to get swallowed up into the dim interior underground. Nearly a minute later, he re-emerged. Both men quickly closed the thick steel doors. The lock clicked into place. They walked back up the ramp and stood behind the machine gun platform. As he removed his head cover, the explosives expert made a hand gesture for everyone to drop down. "Take cover," he shouted. "T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7. Wilkins and House jumped behind the Jeep and hunkered down onto one knee, hands over their heads. 3, 2, 1. The ground rumbled like an earthquake. Dirt and rocks seemed to jump up and rain back down, but as for sound, it didn't register as more than an otherworldly groan that didn't carry beyond the area of the field. Immediately, cement trucks rolled up from the dirt road and began unloading into the deep well at the bottom of the ramp, effectively sealing those steel doors. When the last truck dumped the final load of cement, more trucks rolled in as they drove out. The new trucks were filled with soil, which would be used to cover the ground above what once was the bunkers Sergeant Trent Wilkins guarded by night, had hoped to be guarding for the next 3 months until he ended his military commitment. Wilkins watched as the soldiers who were posted on alert around the ramp now set down their guns, picking up shovels, and stood around waiting for the cement to dry. They didn't ask questions. They didn't even seem perplexed as to what had just happened. But what troubled Wilkins the most was that no one, save the hazmat expert, had come out of the bunker. No doctor rescued, no body recovered. "Sergeant Trent Wilkins, come with me." Trent looked left and saw one of the 2 men in civilian suits gesturing for him to follow. He walked behind the dark-haired, stoop-shouldered man to a Jeep where he was told to get inside. He did. May 16th, 1962, was to be the longest day of Sergeant Wilkins' life. One he would never forget, but he must, because he would remember only that he was under direct orders to forget everything about that day, about being assigned that particular guard duty, and to never discuss it with anyone on penalty of prosecution. 3 months later, Trent Wilkins became a civilian once again, and he decided to settle in the quiet little city of Schertz. He met a nice girl named Anne, got married, and they had a daughter, Mary. Every month, a check for $500 arrived in the mail from the Office of Personnel Management. It was marked as retirement, but Trent hadn't actually retired from the military. He'd only been enlisted for 10 years. Still, the check came monthly and increased annually per cost of living adjustments. Government hush money to guarantee silence, and accepting it made him an accomplice to whatever form of murder had happened in that field. Chapter 2. October 31, 1979, Schertz, Texas, Pickerel Park. 16-year-old Maria Garza walked behind her 2 charges, Jack, age 8, and Marcus, age 4, as they carried sacks of candy. Jack's red cape billowed out behind him as he threw his arms out to his sides and pretended to fly like Superman. Marcus was struggling to remove his Frankenstein mask to pick his nose. "No, Papa, don't do that in public." Maria laughed and pulled a tissue out of her pocket to wipe his nose and clean his hand. Babysitting on Halloween was not the way she would have preferred to spend the night, but at least she was getting paid, and she loved these 2 little boys. They reminded her of her own little cousins who lived on the south side of San Antonio. The sun had set by 6, and she rounded up the boys to go trick-or-treating. Their parents were attending a Halloween party for the business where their father worked. They were to be out until 10, so that left plenty of time for Maria and the boys to have a little fun, too. The temperature kindly dipped to a pleasant 70 degrees, which was cool for Schertz, and with sacks full of candy, Maria decided to take the boys to Pickerel Park to play on the swings for a bit before walking back to their home on Brooks Avenue. Jack raced to the swings first, jumping into one and pumping his legs to swing higher. His bag of candy lay on the ground forgotten. Maria reached down to pick it up and then lifted Marcus into a swing. She stood behind him, pushing gently as he laughed. Wind began whipping up, and night suddenly turned to day as a bright light flooded the area around the swings. "What's that?" Jack looked up and pointed. Marcus began crying. "What?" Maria stood looking up at a large, spherical object hovering close above them, hovering above what seemed to be nearly the entire park. The light was blinding. It made no sound. Only the gusting wind swooshed around them. "Jack!" Maria grabbed Jack's hand and lifted Marcus out of his swing with her other arm. She took off running, dragging Jack behind her as she sprinted home. The object slowly moved in their direction, seeming to follow them. "Maria! Maria! Wait!" Jack cried as he struggled to keep up and remain on his feet as the faster girl pulled him along. Marcus' cries reached fever pitch. "Run, Jack, run!" Maria looked back over her shoulder at Jack and tightened her grip on his hand. As she did, the object suddenly shot up and was gone. She stopped and looked at where it was only a moment before. Her mouth hung open as she stared into the night sky. Darkness once again covered them. Jack doubled over, panting and trying to catch his breath. Marcus continued to cry. "I want my mom," Jack cried. "Come on, don't stop now." Maria began running again, fear in her eyes as she pushed herself to get them all back home. It could come back. It could come back as fast as it left, she thought. They weren't safe out there. The house was just ahead, looking like a haven in a storm. She pushed Jack inside and closed and locked the door. She wanted to call someone, their parents, the police, but who would believe her? Jack started crying again. "What's wrong, Papa?" "My candy! We left my candy!" Maria walked over and put her free arm around Jack, hugging both him and Marcus close. She steered them toward the couch and sat down, still holding them. "I'm sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry." "What was that? What did it want?" he asked, sniffling. "I don't know. I just don't know." "I want my dad." He leaned onto her side. "I know," she said. "I want to tell my dad. He'll know what to do." Jack said this with the confidence an 8-year-old boy feels for his father as the person who can solve or fix anything. "He won't believe us," Maria said. "Why not? We saw it." "He won't believe us," she said again. "Tell him what you want, but who will believe us? I don't even believe it, and I saw it too." "I want my candy." Jack looked forlorn and bewildered. Marcus finally began to calm down. He would grow up not remembering this night, but Jack never forgot. Neither did Maria. Whenever they ran into each other as adults, one would always say, "Hey, do you remember that night?" 3 citizens of Schertz disappeared that night. All that was left behind were the clothes they were wearing. Investigations into their disappearances failed to turn up any more clues. No bodies were ever found. The cases remain unsolved. Chapter 3. January 6, 1995. Schertz, Texas. Jennifer drifted off into her own thoughts. She mentally planned out the day ahead. Picking up paycheck, going to the grocery store, do a load of laundry, and clean the bathroom. All of this would need to be completed before going out that night with the girls. She leaned her head on the passenger side window, noting the cool glass. It was a mild day for January. The temperature was to hit a high around 70 degrees. The sun shone brightly in the noontime sky, and no clouds obscured the blue. Next to her, Jennifer's mom drove down Schertz Parkway, chatting steadily about bingo the night before. Jennifer's mom played bingo with her old lady friends every Thursday night at the Knights of Columbus Hall. She treated it like a contact sport, which was pretty funny since she claimed it relaxed her. Relaxed? Ha! If her number was in the camera, or if some other old lady shouted bingo first before her mom got that one number she needed, she'd start squawking like a pissed-off hen. 2 spots of glare in Jennifer's peripheral vision caught her eye. They were side by side, reflected on the window next to where her face touched the glass. F-15s. Being only 2 miles from Randolph Air Force Base meant seeing F-15s doing maneuvers and such throughout the day. She turned her head to the right to look. Her eyes grew large and her mouth dropped open. They weren't F-15s. "Mom, look!" Jennifer's mom craned her head around at the alarm in her daughter's voice. "What?" She hit the brake, swerving slightly onto the shoulder of the road. "What is that?" Jennifer began gesturing wildly at her mom while still looking back. Turn around and go back." "No," her mom said with fear in her voice. "No way." "Mom, turn the car around, hurry." Jennifer's mom gave in to her daughter and pulled a U-turn on the 2-lane road that was the recently constructed Schertz Parkway. Another car drove by in front of them but didn't stop. Maybe they hadn't noticed what was hovering over the field on the corner at Live Oak Road. Once back at the spot, her mom U-turned again and parked on the shoulder. She got out and walked around to the passenger side. A brave act considering the fear she felt. Jennifer opened the door and swung out her legs. Together they stared at 2 massive oval-shaped objects hovering absolutely still over the cow field. They were about the size of a football field each. There were no windows, no lights, no markings of any kind. Just silvery and smooth. There was no sound either, no birds chirping, no wind rustling, no engines to indicate what was keeping the objects airborne. "Holy shit, Mom! I don't believe it." Her mom walked toward the fence that enclosed the field. A couple of cars drove by, but didn't seem to see what they were seeing. No one else stopped. Suddenly, the object on the left shot straight up and was gone in the blink of an eye. No sound was made. It was like it was there one moment and gone the next. The second object on the right hovered slowly away from them, moving toward FM 3009. Once it was almost completely behind a tree line, it also shot up and was gone. Only silence remained. "What the hell was that, Mom?" Jennifer asked. "UFOs. We just saw UFOs." "We have to call someone." Jennifer pulled her legs back into the car as her mom walked back to the driver's side and got in. "Who are we going to call? No one will believe us." Her mom was never one to get involved in anything. Keep your business to yourself was her motto. "We can call the police or the base. We can call the news. And you saw it too, so it's not like it was just me or just you. That means we're not crazy. We're not calling anyone, you hear me?" Her mom was adamant that they refrain from reporting the incident. "I can't believe you. We just witnessed something most people never see, and you want to forget about it?" "We're not calling anyone," she said again. Minutes ticked by as they drove off, heading once again to Jennifer's work to pick up her check. "We just saw UFOs," her mom said. Then she laughed. "No one is going to believe us. They were huge." I know. They didn't make any sound at all. There's no way they weren't UFOs. We don't have anything like that moves like that or looks like that in our military. And what were they doing out here? In Schertz? There's nothing here but cow fields." "Yeah, what were they doing here?" Jennifer's mom went silent after this last statement. They both did as they pondered why any extraterrestrials would come to Schertz, Texas, of all places. Why, indeed? Years would go by before Jennifer reported what she saw to MUFON in 2011. She never knew if there was any investigation into the sightings. She did, however, notice later that same afternoon that there seemed to be an increase in F-15s flying over the city. She spent the next year of her life terrified they might come back, since she lived in an apartment less than a quarter mile away from that field. Over the years, she would share this story with friends. One New Year's Eve, she told the story again. It was then that her childhood friend's older sister Maria told her she believed her, that she too had experienced something similar 16 years earlier while taking 2 little boys trick-or-treating. Chapter 4. Selma, Texas, neighboring town of Schertz, June 23, 2012. Jesus reached over to change the radio station. Delivering parts to warehouses was routine and boring, but as jobs go, it wasn't bad. The day was clear and sunny. Life was good since his wife told him just that morning that they were expecting their second child. He hoped it was a boy this time, but he'd be happy either way. His daughter was the apple of his eye. When she smiled at him with her 2 front teeth missing, costing the tooth fairy $5 each, he melted. She had him tied around her little finger. He pulled up and turned, and then began backing up to the loading dock. The short guy standing on the dock guided him. He applied the brake and put the truck into park. "Jesus, ¿cómo está?" Jesus hopped down out of the cab and reached out to shake hands with Manuel. "It's all good, man. Hey, I'm going to be a dad again, dude. Congrats, man, congrats. You ready to go through all that shit again? Diapers, no sleep?" Manuel was laughing at him. "I don't do diapers. Just ask Elena. She handled all that with Lucy, and I cook dinner. It's our trade-off." Bah! Manuel made the sound of a whip and clapped Jesus on the back good-naturedly. "Say what you want, Manny, but I don't have to smell baby poops, and I obviously eat good." He patted his stomach and laughed. "Whatever, dude." Manuel signaled 2 other men on the loading dock to come over. Jesus unlocked and opened the back doors. The 2 guys began unloading the boxes. It took 20 minutes to empty the truck. With the doors once again closed and locked, and all signatures gathered on the invoice, Jesus said his goodbyes. "Next time, Manny." "Yeah, man, take care. Hey, let me know if you guys need anything for the baby. Letty and I still have some stuff stored in the garage. We have a crib, and I know she saved all the baby clothes from Sophia." "Don't jinx it. It's going to be a boy this time." "Oh, yeah?" "Yeah, I was crossing my fingers." Both men laughed. "Seriously, though, thanks, Manny. I appreciate it." Jesus got back into the truck and started the engine. He pulled away from the dock toward the service road. As he turned onto it and looked out over the I-35 access, he saw something strange. A large spherical object hovering across the sky. It didn't move. It had no lights or markings that he could see. Fear gripped him. "Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee." He made the sign of the cross over his heart. Suddenly, it shot straight up with a speed he couldn't believe and was gone. Jesus was so freaked out that he grabbed his cell phone and dialed. "Lena, you won't believe what I just saw. Holy hell, you won't believe it, baby." Chapter 5. Present day, Samuel Clemens High School football field, Schertz, Texas. Danny Edwards stood looking down the field with his arm cocked ready to throw the ball. He eyed number 65 in the blue and white practice jersey and then turned abruptly and handed the ball off to number 19, also known as running back Jay Hernandez, his best friend. Jay ran the ball 3 yards, 5 yards, 10 yards, achieving first down, and kept going another 4 yards before being tackled by 3 large jerseys stuffed with sweaty, smelly teenage boys. The whistle blew loud and long. "Damn it, Edwards, that's not the play I sent in!" Coach Davis yelled from the sideline, a blue vein popping out of his red neck. "Now line up again and do what I told you to do." Number 65 glared at him with hands on hips before sauntering back to the scrimmage line. Danny didn't much like number 65, Mark Rivas. Mark gave Danny a hard time every chance he got. He and his buddies, the boys who just tackled Jay, spent all their time between classes getting into trouble. It still baffled Danny that they hadn't been kicked off the team, but it seemed that being a football star made everything else they did wrong okay. Mark was a receiver, and grudgingly a good one. His buddies were offensive line. They made the touchdowns. They scored the points, and Clemens' Buffaloes won games which made the school look good. Of course, they didn't do this all alone. Danny knew he was a good quarterback, and he hoped to get scouted for a scholarship to A&M. He really wanted to be an Aggie, and he also wanted to study large animal veterinary medicine. He received his fair share of accolades from his fellow students, coaches, and teachers. His mom cut out every article in the local Herald with his name in it and saved them all to a scrapbook. She called it his Before He Was Famous book. It really grated on him that Mark and his minions got away with so much, including razzing him and Jay whenever they felt like it. He was getting damn tired of finding his car covered in toilet paper or smeared with egg on the windshield. Once, he even found a dead rat stuffed into the tailpipe. Yep, Mark thought he was the shizit. But Danny knew the truth. He was just a turd. It amazed him that people like that were even allowed to succeed. It just wasn't right. So every chance he got in practice, he would hand off the ball to Jay or someone else to piss Mark off. A small smile of triumph twitched at the corners of his mouth, and his blue eyes twinkled and held back laughter. Sorry, Coach, I must have gotten a mixed signal. Danny turned around so Coach couldn't see the lie written all over his face. You're a terrible liar, dude, said Jay as he passed by laughing, then got into position. Get it right this time, Edwards, or you'll be running laps after practice. Coach shook his head, and those on the sideline could hear him mutter under his breath. Damn kids. Yeah, Edwards, get it right. Mark Rivas swung his hand and smacked Danny on the back of his helmet. He walked to his spot on the far right and took position. Danny got behind Tedberry and began to make the calls. Set, down, hut, hut, hut. He received the ball, ran back 3 steps, and eyed number 65, who had already run downfield and was wide open. Danny cocked his arm, preparing to throw the ball, then turned and handed it off to number 19 again. The whistle blew before the play finished. It was followed by some choice language any parent would be appalled to hear coming from their beloved coach. God damn it, Edwards! Coach threw down his playbook and paced. That's 10 laps starting now. Move it! Coach called in the backup quarterback while Danny took off his helmet and jogged to the track around the playing field. Jay stood laughing while Mark Rivas smirked at him. You too, Hernandez. You're up as crack all the time anyway, so laugh it up, Chuckles. 10 laps for you too. Move it! Mark's buddies began making catcalls at Jay while Danny was already halfway around the track. Jay ran to catch up and looking like someone just stole his cookies. Practice continued on for another hour. Danny and Jay were on their last lap while everyone else was already in the field house getting cleaned up. The sun was low in the sky, and it would be dark before they could shower and put their practice gear away. Danny knew his mom would be pissed at him for being late. Dang, I'm tired, said Jay. Yeah, me too. Sorry about getting you in trouble, man. Danny was walking now, dragging his feet. It's okay, I really hate that dude. Rivas can lick my sweaty butt cheek, man. Jay laughed at his own joke. You think Coach will bench me for that? Nah, you're his golden boy with the golden arm. He knows you can hit the target. He just gets pissed when you ignore his plays in practice. Jay reached the field house door and opened it. I'd never do that in an actual game. He knows that, right? Danny sounded worried. If he was benched for the next game, he'd have hell to pay with his stepdad, and his grandfather would be very disappointed. He'd hate to disappoint Grandpa. He knows, Danny. No worries. Just try and resist the urge to piss Mark off a little more. Save it for school. Jay started tugging his jersey over his head, but it kept getting caught on his shoulder pads. Dang it. Once more yank, and it was off. A pungent odor wafted up Danny's nose. Cripes, dude, you smell like a dead buffalo. Danny fanned his face and scrunched up his nose. Jay smiled and held his arms over his head while blowing on his pits in Danny's direction. Enjoy the aroma, my friend. From me to you with love. Danny laughed as he ducked away. You're sick, man. Go scrub yourself and use soap. Everyone else was dressed and leaving. Coach walked by and looked at Danny and Jay. He started to say something, then shook his head. Get cleaned up and make sure you lock up on the way out. No fooling around, you hear? He shook his finger at Danny. Yes, sir, from both. It just didn't seem like a good idea to further antagonize Coach Davis any more that day. Besides, both boys were tired and hungry. It was 2 out of 3 perpetual states teenage boys found themselves in. The third was horny. If they weren't one, they were the other, sometimes 2 or 3 at the same time. Being a teenage boy was rough. By the time Danny and Jay were showered and dressed, it was dark. The sound of water slowly dripping in the stalls echoed in the empty field house. Stadium lights shined through the high windows as both boys grabbed their dirty laundry and tossed the clothing into their garment bags. The lights went out. Hey, somebody shut off the field lights. Danny looked around, noting that the overhead lights in the locker room were actually kind of dim without help from the outside. The lights flickered, stopped, then went out too. Danny and Jay were left in the dark. "What the hell, man?" Jay's voice sounded extra loud in the dark, quiet room. "I guess the janitors don't know we're still in here." Danny could barely see, but with the moonlight, he could navigate his way toward the door. He started walking in that direction, hefting his garment bag and backpack on his shoulder. "I hate the dark, dude. Hey, where are you?" Jay had always had a problem in the dark. Ever since they were kids, he slept with a nightlight on. No one besides Danny and Jay's mom knew this. "Over here, you big baby. Just follow my voice." Danny tried not to laugh. A loud screech came up from underneath the floor. "What the freak, Danny? That's not funny, man." Jay sounded alarmed. "That wasn't me, Jay." Danny looked around and then down. The sound came from below them. He was sure, but there wasn't anything below them but concrete and dirt. "Don't lie." "Dude, I'm not. It wasn't me." Danny found the door and opened it. Light from the night sky flooded in. "Then what was that?" "It sounded like it was in the room with us." Jay hurried to the door, feeling much better, having some light by which to see. "Maybe it was a rabbit. We have enough of them around here digging holes under the building." "Man, rabbits don't make noise." Jay walked outside and waited while Danny went ahead and flipped the light switch to off, and then checked the lock on the door before closing it behind him. "Sure they do. Haven't you ever heard a rabbit in a snare? They scream loud, and it sounds like a kid crying. I remember going hunting with my granddad when I was little. We came across someone's snare, and there was the rabbit kicking and screaming. It really freaked me out. I remember crying about it, and Granddad told me to suck it up. It was just part of the circle of life." "That's not cool, Danny. Circle's ass. You should have helped that rabbit." It was already too late. "Well, if that was a rabbit, then I don't want to know what got hold of it." Jay pulled out the keys to his old blue Chevy truck, unlocking the doors. "Probably a snake." Danny got in on the passenger side. "Shit, I hate snakes, man." Jay started the truck and seemed in a hurry to get as far away from the darkened field house and the rabbit-stalking snake as possible. As they turned out onto Elbel, heading toward Schertz Parkway, the field lights flickered once and then went dark again. Clouds gathered overhead and the wind began to whip up. Fat drops of rain started to fall, then came down in a torrent. Typical Texas weather. Dry one moment, flash flood the next. Jay turned on his windshield wipers and drove Danny home. Back at the football field, the clouds parted over the stadium, and a small ray of greenish light filtered down, moving in a searchlight pattern. As quickly as it appeared, it was gone. The phenomenon went unnoticed by human eyes, and the rain continued to fall. Chapter 6. It was shot day at Clemens High School. Every year vaccinations were given for flu and other diseases like rubella, tetanus, and the like, all compliments of the local Schertz Masons in cooperation with the Chamber of Commerce. Each student received at least the 2 shots for flu. One was the active flu vaccine, and the other one was an immunity booster to help the kids not get sick after the first shot. This service had been offered for more years than current students could recall. Schertz boasted not only one of the top 40 places in the United States to retire, according to Forbes magazine, but also the healthiest population. Between shot day in the schools and the annual wellness fair hosted by the local Chamber of Commerce, all residents received free vaccinations. The citizens remained healthy, staying fit and lean for the most part. There were some holdouts, the non-native anti-vaccine types, and you could spot them easily because they were usually heavier and far less healthy-looking. But overall, Schertz residents were a healthy, happy bunch. Danny and Jay stood in line waiting to get their flu shots. Both boys were up to date on the rest, so they'd only get the 2 each this day. Behind them in line, Julie Bisbee sniffed back tears. Her nose appeared bright red in her otherwise pretty face. "Aw, Julie, stop crying. It's no big deal. You get them every year." Danny looked at her and wondered just what the big deal was. I know. I just really hate needles, Danny. They scare me. All I have to do is smell the alcohol and I freak out. Look, my palms are sweating." She held out her hands to him so he could see they were indeed looking rather moist. "It's not so bad, just a quick poke and it's done," said Danny. "That's what she said, man." Jay piped in, laughing at his own joke. "Shut up, Jay, you're not funny." Julie gave him an irritated look and reached up to readjust the clip, holding her dark brown hair on top of her head. "Naw, he's funny. Funny looking." Danny put his hand on Jay's face and pushed him away, laughing. The two boys immediately started slap fighting, and then Jay pulled Danny into a headlock. "Now who's funny looking, huh? Come on, dude, say it. Say you love me. I'm not letting go until you do." Danny tried to elbow Jay in the ribs, but it didn't work. He panted and stomped on Jay's toe instead. "Dude, that hurt!" Jay let go and hopped around, cursing at his friend. Danny laughed. "That's what you get for trying to show me up in front of my girl, man." He put his arm around Julie's shoulders. Julie shrugged him off, but her small smile said she didn't really mind. "I'm not your girl, you idiot." "Sure you are. You just don't know it yet." Danny winked at her, causing her to blush. Jay limped back over and punched Danny in the arm, hard. "Ow, what the hell, dude?" He rubbed the sore spot. "Now both your arms will hurt today. Just wait, Danny. I'm going to get you good in the other arm after your shots." Jay, who was always in a good mood, looked mad. Danny felt bad. Maybe he'd hurt Jay's foot worse than he'd intended. "I'm sorry, dude. You know I love you." "What's that?" Jay asked. "I'm sorry?" Danny said it again. "No, the last part. What you said last." Jay waited. "What? That I love you?" Danny didn't know what his friend was asking. Julie giggled. She knew what was coming. Jay's face had a tell that he was joking. His lower lip twitched on the left side. Funny how being his best friend all these years hadn't helped him figure that out. And Danny still fell for it every time. "Wussy." Jay said it, laughed, and then ran out of reach without any hint of a limp. "You big faker." Danny started to go after him, but the nurse came out with her clipboard. "Edwards, Daniel." She looked at Danny. The nurse was an older lady who looked like she'd just sucked on a lemon. Pursing his lips to bite off his next words, Danny gave Jay a look that said, "This isn't over yet." Jay stood behind Julie, using her as a shield, and stuck out his tongue at his friend. Danny began to walk into the nurse's office, but turned and pointed at Jay. He looked at Julie and blew her a kiss. "You know he really likes you, right?" Jay said to Julie. "No, he doesn't. He just likes to mess with me," she said, blowing it off as nothing. "I'm telling you, Julie, he likes you, for reals." She looked skeptical. "Go on, don't believe me, but you're breaking my boy's heart." Jay did his best to convince her. He'd been listening to his friend talk about Julie for a whole year, but it was Danny's own fault that this girl didn't believe him because he was too much of a wimp to tell her himself. He just joked about it, so it was no wonder she didn't take him seriously. Yeah. Julie said the words, but a part of her wondered if maybe Jay was telling the truth. Sometimes it did seem like Danny liked her as more than a friend. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her, and he would smile, that slow, sweet smile of his. But then he'd make some dumb joke and ruin the moment. But maybe, just maybe, unless she heard it from him, she wasn't going to allow herself to get her hopes up. "Hernandez, Jason?" The sour-looking nurse with the clipboard was back. Danny walked out as Jay began to walk in, and he reached out quickly, punching Jay in his right arm. Danny hoped that it was the same arm the nurse would be giving him his shots in. He heard Jay mutter under his breath, "Pinche cabrón." He stopped by Julie, putting his arm around her shoulders and reaching out with his free hand to hold hers. "What are you doing?" Julie looked at him confused. "I'm holding your hand. Going to stand right here with you until you have to go in, so don't be afraid, okay?" He looked sincere, staring down into her eyes. Julie smiled. "Okay, thanks." He squeezed her hand and hugged her closer. He could smell the shampoo in her hair. He leaned down a little and inhaled. It was nice, some flowery scent. He'd wondered if he'd ever be able to just ask her out. The idea of her laughing at him or saying no and rejecting him scared him to death. Things were easy between them right now. Sort of flirtatious, but not serious. He didn't want to lose that. That would really suck. But he also wanted to add to it. be able to tell her how pretty she is, how he always feels excited to see her, and happy to be with her even if they weren't doing anything special. And he wanted to kiss her. He'd been dying to kiss her for a year now. Would he ever be able to man up and do it? Jay didn't think so. He teased him about it, though. "Bisbee, Julie?" Sourpuss glanced disapprovingly at their clasped hands. "It'll be okay." Danny saw her eyes widen in fear and noted the tears appearing again. Without thought, he leaned down and kissed the top of her head. Julie sniffed and smiled, and then followed the nurse in as Jay walked out. "Close, but no cigar, man. No lip action." Jay razzed him, but secretly he was proud that his friend had made the move, even if it was a small one. "Baby steps, my friend. It's all part of my master plan to win her over." They headed off back to class, walking slowly because they didn't want to go back to Algebra 2, and Julie might be able to catch up if they dragged their feet. Inside the small office, Julie held her breath as Nurse Velma swabbed her upper right arm with alcohol. She hated that smell so much because it meant a needle would follow, and she was getting not one shot, but two. The sour-faced woman with curly gray hair pinched the skin on her bicep between her rubber-gloved fingers and jabbed the first needle in. "Ow!" Julie squinched her eyes shut and turned her head away. "Stop fussing, Missy. It's not that bad. And remember, it's free. Do you have any idea how much annual vaccinations cost at a doctor's office?" Sourpuss let her disdain show in her voice. Apparently, the woman either hated her job or she just didn't like the kids. She picked up the second syringe and pulled the cap off with her teeth. "No," Julie answered, afraid to relax her face and open her eyes until it was over. "I don't, but I'm guessing it would hurt either way." In went the second needle filled with a special serum of vitamins and other stuff to help the body fight off flu. That's what they told the media on the 3 occasions it covered Schertz's annual vaccination program. Parents had to sign off on it, as they had the option to refuse, but not more than a handful ever had. Who refuses vitamins? They're harmless and help kids stay healthy. And the city had a nearly 100% track record for health among kids, residents, and even their seniors, minus the handful of holdouts. Other surrounding cities tried to copy the program as far as offering a vitamin booster shot, but theirs didn't quite have the same results. Children still got sick, albeit maybe not as often. But their efforts didn't match those of Schertz, Texas. "All done, and you're still in one piece. Off you go now, back to class." Turning away, Velma began making notes in Julie's file. Julie pulled her sleeve down over her arm, trying not to scratch at the site, now covered with a small Band-Aid. "Don't scratch at that," Velma said, as if she had eyes in the back of her head. "Make sure to move the arm around. It might get sore, but just stretch it out." "Yes, ma'am." Julie picked up her book bag, slinging it over her left shoulder, and walked out. The nurse finished writing her notes in Julie Bisbee's file and placed it in a box along with all the other student files she'd written that day. The box was labeled Cellulose Batch 2015. She picked up her clipboard and walked outside the office where a line of teenagers continued to wait for their injections. "Next!" Friday nights were a big deal in Schertz in fall. Football games brought out the competitive spirit in everyone, from the athletes to the students to the parents. Clemens Stadium lit up, becoming a beacon of activity at the center of the city. Families lined up with tickets in hand to get inside and find a good seat. Everyone loaded up on Frito pie, nachos, and soft drinks. The band played, entertaining the crowd, and the cheerleaders got everyone on their feet. Even the halftime shows were a big deal as the dance teams from both schools gyrated to the beat of popular music. No matter the weather, the games were a sold-out event. Danny's parents and grandpa sat in the bleachers noshing cheap junk food while cheering him on. His mom, Mary, and stepdad Archie cheered, but his grandpa hollered plays he couldn't possibly hear. "Come on, Danny, fire up that gun and shoot the ball down the field, boy." It was 3rd and 10 in the fourth quarter. The Buffaloes were down by 3 points against the opposing team. A touchdown would win the game and take the team into the playoffs. Danny acknowledged Coach Davis's signals. He knew the play would send number 65 downfield. He was to fake to number 19, Jay Hernandez, then send the Eagle flying down to Mark Rivas for the touchdown. They only had 3 minutes left in the game. Of course, rain began to fall, making the pigskin slick and obscuring vision. Danny rubbed his hands on his pants and got in position. He cleared his head of all the noise from the crowd. The ball snapped and the game was in play. He caught it and turned right into the fake. Jay winked at him and flew by with his hands tucked near his body as if he carried a ball. 2 defensive tackles took him down. Seconds ticked by as Danny reversed, sighting Rivas at the far end near the goal line. Fat raindrops smacked onto his helmet as a torrent let loose from the sky. He pulled back his arm, running backwards, took aim, stopped, and threw the ball for all he was worth. It sliced through the Texas mini-storm, shooting like a heat-seeking missile, and was snatched out of the air by number 65, who turned to run the remaining 7 yards into the end zone. Touchdown! The whistle blew and the referee's arms came up. It was a good play. All that was left was a solid field goal and then sit on the ball as much as possible over the next 2 minutes and 40 seconds. By then, everyone would be soaked. Still, the crowd remained and cheered their teams on. "Did you see that, Mary?" Danny's grandpa clapped his hands, applauding the play while bumping his elbow into his daughter's side. "Brilliant! That's what that was. That's my grandson, the quarterback there," he told the man and woman sitting in front of him who struggled to share an umbrella. Water dripped off the old man's hat and jacket, but he didn't care. He was grinning ear to ear. "I saw it, Dad." Mary peeked out from under her umbrella. Unlike many, she'd watched the weather forecast for the evening and came prepared. "You almost dropped it," Archie piped in, earning a scowl from his father-in-law. Mary, as always, did her best to smooth the ruffles between her dad and her second husband, whom he did not approve. "Now, hon, it's raining cats and dogs out there, and almost only counts in horseshoes. Danny won the game." She smiled, feeling proud of her boy. Archie gave her a sideways glance. 65 won the game. He's the one who caught the ball and ran it in. He was hard on Danny. This was one of the reasons Mary's father didn't care for her husband, which he couldn't have done if Danny hadn't sent the ball right into his hands, she said as she scooted a few inches away, leaving Archie outside the protection of the umbrella. She knew how to make her displeasure known, and did so at that moment. Archie James sat with water dripping down his bald head. One look at his wife's face, and he knew he'd gone too far. He thought she spoiled the boy to make up for his father not being around. Archie also thought Danny needed more discipline and less babying. His father-in-law made it clear he didn't approve of Archie having any say whatsoever in his grandson's upbringing, which left him in no man's land of sorts. The field lights flickered as thunder boomed overhead. The crowd on the other side of the field was already dispersing as the last few plays were run. As the rain came down, the clock ran out, and the Buffaloes won the game. Danny and his teammates ran off the field to the field house, where everyone was laughing and hollering, their spirits high from their victory. "Did you see that? I yanked that ball out of the air and ran it in like a pro, son." Mark Rivas was reenacting his touchdown for his friends. In Danny's eyes, he was behaving like a complete moron. He knew he couldn't have scored without his winning pass, but he said nothing, unlike Rivas. Jay ran up behind him and lifted him off his feet, whooping like a loon. "You rock, Edwards. That was one tight throw, buddy, and in this rain, too. Put me down, Jay. Jeez, dude." Jay dropped Danny back on his feet where Coach Davis reached out and shook his hand as he walked by. "Good job, son. It's about time you listen to me and make the plays I call in." His voice was rough, but the wink gave him away. Coach Davis was happy. "Thanks, Coach." Danny felt a smile tug at his lips. Coach stood on one of the benches and shouted for everyone to settle down. "All right, boys, we barely got this one in under the wire. We'll have to work harder next time so we aren't struggling to catch up in the fourth. Now, I made some notes." Everyone groaned. "Hush it! I made some notes, but we'll go over those at next practice. For now, get cleaned up and let's all meet at my place for a victory dinner. Pizzas, chips, and drinks on me." The field house erupted in applause and loud hoots from every player. They all showered and dressed in record time. Danny and Jay tossed their dirty uniforms into the toolbox in the back of Jay's truck as they drove out of the parking lot following the rest of the team to Coach's house in Greenfield Village. They were all looking forward to the food and fun. Coach always threw a great after-game party, even when they lost. The last car drove off the lot, leaving the field, so bright and alive only a little more than half an hour before, in total darkness. Lightning lit up the sky and thunder boomed, rumbling low. An answering rumble from beneath the field shook the ground, getting louder and blending in with the storm. The turf on the field erupted and spewed dirt, grass, and chunks of rock and concrete into the air. Some of it landed on the bleachers, breaking the benches. A rock busted out bulbs on the field lights, and the scoreboard took a hit, cracking off one corner. As the debris settled, all grew quiet once again. A glowing green light appeared from the hole in the field, muted and pulsating briefly, then fading away. Above, a dim bluish light peeked out from the black clouds. It streaked across the road toward Farm Road 78, where it descended slowly into a thick crop of trees, momentarily setting the old Starlight Terrace Drive-In movie entry gate aglow. Then all went black as the rain continued to fall. "Oh, man, I'm so tired, dude," Danny groaned as Jay drove him home in the rain. "Seriously? I think you ate a whole pizza by yourself. Hungry much?" Jay laughed at his friend. "So did you, Hernandez. What can I say? Winning makes me hungry." Jay sat at the traffic light, waiting to turn up Elbell Road. His windshield wipers slapped back and forth, trying to clear away the rain. There were no other cars around as the lights turned green, and he drove back past the high school toward Danny's Street. As they passed by the football field, something ran in front of the truck. Jay slammed on the brake. "What the freak was that?" His arm reached out automatically to block Danny from flying forward, even though he wore his seatbelt. Danny saw it, and they both looked left to the field on the opposite side of the road. There was no one there, but both were sure they'd seen a dark figure run out in front of them. "Where'd he go?" Danny leaned over, trying to look out of Jay's window, but the rain cascading down blurred everything. "I don't see him, man, but that was one big dude. What the heck was he thinking? Crazy fool?" Jay let off the brake and started rolling forward again. The stink of sulfur permeated through the truck vents. "Dude, did you fart or what?" Danny plugged his nose and waved his other hand to clear the air. "Oh, man, I ain't got no gas. That's like some rotten eggs. Geez, I can't even unroll the windows with this rain. Dang, where the heck did that come from?" "That stinks, man," Danny coughed. Jay began coughing and leaned forward, becoming lightheaded. Danny saw his friend grow lax, his head dropping chin to chest. His own vision blurred, and his body felt disconnected from his head as he leaned sideways and slumped, with only the seatbelt holding him up. The truck rolled to a stop, bumping into the curb. 15 minutes ticked by before a police officer came upon them and called for help. 20 minutes after that, an ambulance took the boys to the hospital. An hour later, Jay's truck was parked at the Schertz Police Department, being inspected for drugs. 8 hours later, police surrounded the now destroyed football field, scratching their heads. 2 hours before that, news crews showed up to film the busted bleachers, the hole in the ground, and to grill officers and city officials. But no one had any answers. The only people who'd made the connection between the football field and the 2 hospitalized boys were Colonel Lewis Reed, retired and now head of the local Masons, Velma Richards, a retired Air Force nurse, and Danny's grandfather, Trent Wilkins. Richards and Reed consulted quietly with Lewis Reed, Jr., the president of the Schertz Bank and Trust, and the head of the Chamber of Commerce, along with the mayor, Lloyd Webber. Reed pulled out his cellular and made a call. Within the hour, the military showed up, cordoning off the area and pushing everyone back, including local police officers who were none too happy about losing jurisdiction. A crowd of locals gathered to watch. All speculated, but no one had any clue as to what was going on. But Trent knew. Secrets never remained buried long. He turned and walked back to his home on Aviation. From there, He climbed into his old Chevy and drove to the hospital to check on his grandson and Jay. Worry marred his wrinkled face, and memories of a night back in May of 1962 haunted him. Whatever was in that bunker then had found its way out now, and Danny was in danger. Silence had only bought him time. Now time was up. Chapter 7. Danny's hospital room was crowded with teenage boys. His teammates had all come to visit him and Jay, bringing balloons, magazines, and junk food. Both boys checked out okay after the emergency room doctor and attending physician all ran several tests to include blood screens and even CAT scans. They could find no medical reason for the boys had passed out in the truck last night. Jay and Danny both explained about a person running in front of the vehicle in the rain and the overwhelming odor of sulfur, which was the last thing either of them remembered. With all the news buzzing about the chaos at the Clemens football field, doctors speculated that some kind of gas leak must have caused the explosion that ripped up the field and made the two boys fall unconscious. They would know more after the military who'd taken over the school grounds completed their investigation. Of course, this meant no school for the time being, which made the kids happy and parents miserable. Trent waited patiently in the visitor's lounge while his grandson enjoyed time with his friends. He and Jay shared a room on the third floor, so at least the group and their noise was contained in that area. He knew it was only a matter of time before they sent someone here to talk to Danny and Jay, and he planned to be here when that happened. He grabbed a cup of coffee from the pot put out for guests and sat down in one of the deliberately uncomfortable chairs. CNN was running a special report about the Oklahoma harvest, a strange and nightmarish event from 2010 involving several cities in that state, including the small town of Farley, where nearly every resident went missing, leaving behind only bloody clothing. Well, that happened in the summer that year. Why are they bringing it up now? Trent spoke out loud without thought, but his question was answered by a male nurse on break. Seems the media is doing what they do best, speculate and whip up mass panic. Some geneticist has gone missing, and all they found was a pile of bloody clothing like the type of stuff they found in those cities in Oklahoma. The nurse stirred his coffee with a swizzle stick, his eyes on the flat screen. Trent's shoulders tensed. What was the doctor's name? He waited, praying he wouldn't hear what he was sure he was about to hear. Some Russian name. Tripsky, Travesky, Troyevsky, he offered. Yeah, that's it. Andrei Troyevsky. Is he famous for something? I've never heard of him. No, not famous. Trent watched the television as the news station showed image after image of the abandoned homes, and camera crews entered shining a spotlight on piles of clothes, laid out as if someone were still inside of them. The weird thing was they were bloody, rendering the view with a feeling of dread. But you knew his name. Oh, I'm sorry, you knew him? The nurse leaned on the counter, sipping his coffee and looking sympathetic. Somewhat. He used to work for the military many years ago. The news anchor's voice droned on, explaining that some people actually survived the harvest, the name given to the mysterious mass disappearance of residents by one of the survivors, Dave Forrester. In the interview, Forrester explained about large, dark figures smelling of sulfur, and another survivor, Maggie Harris, said she saw a light streaking across the sky during the day that did not match by description any known aircraft in the world.
Nothing we have can move like what I saw. Nothing,
she said. The mystery of the missing residents remained unsolved to date, and news stations had become fond of bringing it up before Halloween. But the only thing that caught Trent's attention beyond the name of Troyevsky was the phrase, smelling of sulfur. It couldn't be a coincidence. Troyevsky was one of 3 people inside the bunker that night. Doc Parker never came out. Now Troyevsky was missing under very suspicious circumstances, leaving only Colonel Reed and himself, and having such striking similarities between how the people in Farley disappeared and how Dr. Troyevsky went missing, along with reports of dark figures and strong sulfuric odor, was like a nightmare come true for Trent Wilkins. It was the hideous karma of Dante's circle of hell for those who kept secrets. Whatever was happening now was its own judgment. But it shouldn't be happening to Danny or to Jay. That had to be just an accident, right? Trent got up and left the lounge, heading back to his grandson's room. When he arrived, the other boys were gone, and standing at the foot of Danny's bed were two men wearing black suits. Suddenly, it was 1962 all over again. "What do you want with my grandson?" Trent rushed to Danny's side and put himself between the boy and the men in black. "No need to panic. We're simply asking him a few questions." The man who answered was older, with fading red hair and a square jaw that reminded Trent of a bulldog. He cast a sideways look at his partner, a pasty blonde with broad shoulders, and an earpiece poking out from his left ear. Dark glasses covered both their eyes, glasses they hadn't even bothered to remove inside the hospital. Trent recognized the intimidation tactic for what it was. He'd seen it before. Not much had changed from then till now. The blond man faced him. "And who are you?" He flipped open a small notebook, pen poised, and waited. "I'm his grandfather, or weren't you listening?" Over 50 years of suppressed hostility erupted in that one statement. "I was listening, Gramps. I meant your name." The blond man quipped sarcastically as his lip curled up into a smirk on one side. "Sergeant Trent G. Wilkins, U.S. Air Force, retired. Look it up." Trent knew what they'd find if they did. After all, they obviously had clearance with the government above and beyond the standard civil service worker. He didn't care. He'd lived too many years with this secret, and now it appeared the chickens had come home to roost. Or one chicken, anyway. One very dangerous chicken. The blonde wrote his name down. "And where were you during the incident?" "Which incident?" Trent felt his anger boiling and tried to calm down a bit. He wasn't a young man anymore. At 75 years of age, getting overly excited was not a good idea. "Both. When your grandson and his friend here passed out in the truck, and when the destruction happened on the Clemens High School football field." This came from the bulldog. "I was home. Where were you?" The bulldog sighed. "The boys say they saw a dark figure run across the road before they claim to have been overpowered by the smell of sulfur. We estimate the destruction of the field happened at around the same time. Do you have any ill feelings toward your government, Mr. Wilkins?" Bulldog faced him squarely. Trent realized these G-men knew more than they were letting on. "What are they talking about, Grandpa?" Danny was looking back and forth between his granddad and the two men. Jay was sitting on the side of the bed with a confused but wide-eyed expression on his face. Trent ignored Danny for the moment, putting his hand up in a gesture that told him to wait. He took a step forward. "I've been beyond loyal to my government, sirs. I've held to my word and kept the code all these years. It's not me you need to be worried about." "Is that right? Then what is it you're suggesting?" Blondie spoke up. "Go back and read your reports, May of 1962, gentlemen. What you're up against, whatever secret was buried in that field then, it's out. And if you want any more answers, go ask Colonel Lewis Reed. Leave my grandson be." "Calm down, Mr. Wilkins." Bulldog put up his hands, trying to regain control. "Not on your life. This problem you've all created has now endangered my family. Now get out. You've done enough damage." Bulldog and Blondie looked at each other and slowly backed away, turning to leave. Bulldog stopped at the door and threw a look at the boys. "If you think of anything else, you have our card. We're only trying to help." After they left, Danny turned to his grandpa. "What's going on? What did you mean I'm in danger?" Trent sat down in the chair next to Danny's bed. His heart was beating fast, and he felt suddenly weak. He needed a moment. Jay and Danny waited while Trent rested, taking some deep breaths. Then he began to speak, and the story he told left them disbelieving and yet believing. And in the light of what happened to them the night before, Trent's tale scared the hell out of them. "Boys, what I'm about to tell you is a secret I've kept for 52 years. But I don't want to leave the world still holding on to this. I can't keep it anymore because doing so puts you both in further danger. You need to know." The sun was setting by the time Trent finished telling his tale in a third-floor hospital room. Meanwhile, over at the high school, 3 white, unmarked trucks rolled into the parking lot in front of the field house. There were already 2 camouflaged covered supply trucks on site, 3 black sedans, and a satellite surveillance vehicle. A dozen armed soldiers kept watch around the perimeter of the football stadium as investigators entered onto the field, monitoring the gaping hole in the middle of the 50-yard line. Scientists collected bits of concrete and debris and prepared to enter the opening in the ground by suiting up in hazmat gear. Out on the street, news trucks, vans, and a crowd gathered to try and see what was going on and figure out why the military was there. Onlookers speculated about underground gas pockets, illegal aliens, tourists, and more. Still, not everyone was a busybody. Ethel Green could see the lights from all the vehicles illuminating the darkening sky from her apartment several blocks away. The retirement community next door to the electric company had been around for quite some time, but she'd been a resident for the last 10. She stood on her small back porch in her bright yellow muumuu, hands on her slim, frail hips, watching the lights. Behind her, the railroad bells began to clang, indicating the evening train was about to roll by. The horn sounded off in the distance. All the commotion caused her neighbor, Nettie Ford, to look out her back door. She waved at her. Ethel waved back. She'd got to know Nettie when she moved to Schertz to be closer to her daughter Rose and her grandchildren. Originally from Sugar Land near Houston, Ethel didn't know anyone else in town besides her family. Nettie was a nice lady, but she trusted too easily. Always going on about all the free programs in Schertz, all the free care offered to seniors, activities and such, even vaccinations. Ethel didn't cotton to free stuff. If God had intended stuff to be free, he wouldn't have created Republicans. She didn't trust the government, not even small city government. When the mobile medical bus rolled around to the senior center, Nettie would go with both sleeves rolled up, ready to get her free vaccinations. Ethel stayed home. She suffered with her arthritis and frequent bouts of colds from the damned Texas cedar trees. But she was no wimp. All she needed was some apple cider vinegar and local honey, and she was right as rain. All without free government nonsense. Ethel grew tired of standing there and turned to go back inside. She closed the back door and ambled to her easy chair. It was almost time for the 700 Club. As Pat Robertson began speaking, a foul smell caught Ethel's attention. It was bad, like rotten eggs, but worse. She got up slowly from the chair and sniffed. Not quite sure where it was coming from, she went into the kitchen. The smell was less obvious there. She turned and shuffled her slippered feet around the living room. The odor became stronger as she approached her bedroom. What in tarnation? She reached to flip on the light switch, but the overpowering fumes made her woozy, and Ethel fell forward onto her hands and knees. She coughed and sputtered, and then tried to stand up. As she sat up on her knees and reached to steady herself by placing her hand on the wall, she felt something hot and slimy instead. It coated her fingers. She looked up just as something massive and black as pitch came at her fast. The last word Ethel said was, "No!" Next door, Nettie could hear Ethel's shout muffled through the walls. She turned her television set up louder. She glanced over at her husband of 45 years, Henry, and said, "Ethel must have landed on Chris Hayes' show again instead of that damn 700 Club." Henry nodded. "Gives her a fit every time." With no further reason to hold the boys, the physician wrote up discharge papers and sent them home. Jay's parents stood in the lobby talking to Danny's mom while his stepdad, Archie, went to get the car. Archie had been much kinder to Danny after his accident. Seeing how upset and terrified his wife was over the possibility of losing her only son made him realize he'd been unfair. Worse, the feeling of dread and grief he experienced himself had him reanalyzing his relationship with the boy. It was in the emergency room during all the craziness of testing and speculating that he suddenly knew he loved his stepson. He no longer viewed Danny as a rival for his mother's affection. Instead, he looked upon him with new eyes, the eyes of a father. Archie had looked down on the unconscious boy and knew with a certainty he'd been wrong. That's when he walked outside and sat down on the steps in the parking lot and prayed. He prayed that whatever happened to Danny wasn't permanent. He prayed the boy would wake up and that he'd get a second chance to do right by him. He even cried. They were the tears of a man who'd been a jackass, but hoped for the opportunity to make things right even if he didn't deserve it. The boy deserved it, and his mother did too. Mary was his world all along. He just hadn't let the kid into that idealized world. Now he would, and he'd make damn sure nothing bad ever happened to Danny again. Archie pulled the car up and put it in park, then hopped out to open the door to the back seat. While Mary fussed over Danny and helped him get in, Rick Hernandez pulled up behind him to get Jay. The boys waved at each other while Mary hugged Louisa. "Come on, Mom, I'm hungry." Danny laughed at his mom and made a face at Jay, who was sitting in the front seat of his dad's SUV. "You're always hungry." Archie looked over the seat at Danny. "So what would you like us to pick up on the way home?" His unexpected request caught Danny off guard. "I don't know. Maybe we should ask Mom what she'd like first." Archie smiled. "That's nice of you, but I'm sure she'll agree the choice can be yours today." Danny grinned. "Well, burgers from Chester's would be great." Yeah, that would be good. And a shake?" Danny couldn't believe his luck. "And a shake," he agreed. "What's this about shakes?" Mary got into the car and closed the door. "Archie says we can maybe get burgers and shakes from Chester's?" Danny leaned up behind his mom's seat. "Oh, he did he?" Mary looked at her husband, a smile of approval spreading across her face. "Well, like Danny said, only if you approve." He gave her the same hopeful look that was on her son's face. She burst out laughing. "Okay, Chester's it is. But let me call an order so we can grab it and get home. You still need your rest, young man." "Oh, Mom, you heard the doc. He said he couldn't find anything wrong with me." "I heard him say he didn't know what could have caused it, not that there wasn't anything wrong. So we're going to take it easy until we know for sure. No arguments." Danny sat back. "Okay, but we still get shakes, right?" Mary found the number for Chester's on her cell phone and dialed. "Yes, we still get shakes." "Good. Chocolate, please, and a double cheeseburger with fries." "What about you, honey?" Mary reached out and put her hand on his shoulder as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot. "The same, please." Mary smiled. This was the first time since she married Archie that she felt absolutely no tension between him and her son. The two were actually getting along, and it made her heart swell with love. "Julie Bisbee's been calling to check on you. You should call her when we get home." Mary glanced over at Danny. His face went from happy to surprised to anxious in just 3 seconds flat. "She has?" "Oh, yeah." His stepdad looked at him in the rearview mirror, crying even. "She cried?" His mom turned. "I guess she likes you, honey." Danny looked out the window and thought about that. "We're just friends, Mom." But the smile on his face said he was pleased to hear it. Mary and Archie shared a look. He reached over and took her hand in his, feeling complete and happy to have his family all together. Chapter 8. That evening, the highest-ranking members of the local Masonic order gathered for an unscheduled meeting. They climbed the stairs to the second floor of the old Sipple hardware store on Main Street, looking around as they did while keeping their heads down. For Colonel Lewis Reed, the steep climb on the fire escape steps was difficult. His advanced age and debilitating arthritis in his knees, hands, and back pained him greatly. But the meeting was necessary. A secret, long held by the founding members, threatened to become known if the findings from the military investigation got into the wrong hands. Already, the FBI had sent 2 goons into town. They were asking questions and poking around. Reed tried reaching out to his old contact at the Bureau, but he'd retired. And 2 hotshot directors later, there was no longer a guarantee of a way to call off the dogs. If they discovered what the Masons had been doing all these years, they'd want a piece of the action, and he wasn't about to share. Unfortunately, he might not be around to reap the benefits after tonight either. Colonel Reed, his son Lou Jr., Mayor Lloyd Webber, Nurse Velma Richards, Natasha House Williams, the head of the local Chamber of Commerce, and Jeff Taylor, a local councilman running for Congress in the 21st District, all sat in their seats at the table. Colonel Reed sat at the head, looking serious. "As you are all aware, we have a problem," he began, looking around at each one. "Just what is the problem, Colonel? What is it that we need to be worried about?" Taylor asked. He was the last of the 6 to be inducted into the inner sanctum, and now the Masons supported his candidacy for the Texas legislature. "Is this something that will affect my campaign?" Reed gave the younger man a long look. His lengthy military career had taught him one valuable thing. The lives of many always outweighs the life of one. He also learned never let them take you alive. He didn't have any difficulty in making that decision for himself, and as a former military leader, he had no qualms about deciding who should be sacrificed for the greater good. "Son," he began, "what was in that hole is no longer there." "Then why are we here? I don't understand." Taylor appeared perplexed. "Yes, Colonel, exactly what is the problem?" Natasha ventured, as in the dark as Taylor. "It's out," Reed said. "What's out?" Taylor was getting tired of all the vagueness. "It, you fool!" Reed exploded, then promptly fell into a coughing fit. Lou Jr. patted his father on the back and offered him a handkerchief. "Hold your horses, Taylor." Everyone waited. Jeff Taylor tapped his fingers on the desk while Velma and Natasha exchanged looks with Mayor Weber. The colonel composed himself. "Since the founding of this group, excluding yourself, Taylor, we've worked to preserve what is arguably the greatest discovery of our time. For the past 52 years, our city has been the recipient of that discovery and has benefited in ways we couldn't even imagine in the beginning. Lloyd and Velma were the first to be brought in. Dr. Andrei Troyevsky and I—" "Wait, where have I heard that name?" Taylor interrupted. The colonel raised an eyebrow at him. "If you'd be patient, I'll get to that." Reed cleared his throat. "Now, Troyevsky worked with the military back in the early 60s. His field was genetics. I say was because the good doctor recently went missing." He looked at Jeff Taylor. "If you've been following the news, then you heard his name there." "Yeah," Taylor bit his lip, "but the news said they only found some bloody clothes, not the doctor. As far as I know, no ransom demands from any kidnappers." "There won't be, and they won't find his remains either." Reed mopped his forehead with the handkerchief. "Why not?" "Because, son, what took Troyevsky isn't human." Taylor's eyes grew wide. Then he opened his mouth and laughed out loud. "What do you mean it isn't human? That's ludicrous. Okay, you got me. Now, what's really the problem?" He looked around the table and noticed no one was laughing. Finally, Velma Richards spoke up. "You ridiculous moron. The problem is we're likely to be next." Taylor's smile faded. "You're serious?" "Yes, we're serious," Velma said. "All right, explain." Taylor sat forward, resting his arms on the table. "Back in 1962, the Air Force recovered a wrecked, unidentified craft in a field in Schertz. The hole it created when it crashed was so deep, the only logical thing the military could do was dig around it. A bunker was built into the ground, and only a select number of officials were given clearance to examine and run tests on that craft. And what was found inside? Those individuals were Dr. Thomas Parker, Dr. Andrei Troyevsky, myself, and a Major Benjamin Edwards. Edwards died a year later in a training exercise." "What about the other doctor?" Taylor asked, horrified by what he was hearing. "Troyevsky you know about, or at least you know as much as we do. But Doc Parker," he shook his head. "Parker was murdered." "By what? By who?" "By what was inside that bunker with him. We never recovered his body. We're not sure how it got out of containment, but it did, and it got Parker. After that, we had to destroy the lab and seal that bunker forever. It was made of 10-foot thick concrete and steel, and it was buried deep into that field. Then the city decided it needed a new high school. Old O. Henry wasn't good enough. When I realized they were building it right over that bunker, I thought for sure our secret would be discovered. But they put the football field there, and I figured things would be okay. And they were, until the other night. Taylor took a deep breath and thought for a moment. And what about our business interest? How is that linked? Reed sighed. The military wrote that lab off as a loss. They never knew we smuggled out any of the research. Troyevsky helped further that research to what we now have today as the single most effective vaccine in the world. The early mayors of Schertz helped us set up the initial human trials, and Lloyd continued that agreement. Lloyd looked surprised and alarmed, hearing far more details tonight than he was ever privy to in the past. Velma has kept the records on the trials for all these years. And where does Natasha come in? Taylor looked at the head of the Chamber of Commerce, who appeared far too young to have been around this situation from the beginning. Well, besides her business contacts, which are invaluable, and have provided the necessary funding needed to run the trials, she's a legacy. A legacy? What the hell does that mean? Taylor was feeling out of the loop. Natasha sat up and looked at Jeff Taylor with irritation flashing in her eyes. My father was the key to smuggling out the original research data and samples. His name was John J. House. At that time, he was the sergeant in charge of the men assigned guard duty at the bunker. He retired as a chief years later. I see. And where is he now? Why isn't he here and helping us with this? Pain flashed in Natasha's eyes. He's dead. Jeff's mouth opened and then closed. Shit, I'm sorry. How did it happen? Velma stood and paced, wringing her hands. It happened a few years back. When John retired, he stayed a while here in Schertz. Natasha graduated from the very high school that now has a hole in its football field. But as the years went by, he grew more fearful. Her eyes held a faraway look. I remember him telling me he had nightmares about it. She paced the circumference of the table, walking behind each person, and eventually coming back to stand next to her seat. He moved back to Oklahoma. That's where he was born and raised. Farley, Oklahoma. She shook her head as tears blurred her vision. The connection to the harvest was realized, and Taylor smacked the table with his palm. Why the hell didn't anyone tell me this before? Don't you think this is something I should have known before I agreed to let your group fund my campaign? This has scandal written all over it, and now I'm complicit. Reed sat forward. Yes, you are, and because of that, you need to calm down. The deal has been struck with Peru, and another is in the works with the government of South Africa. Once they both go through, you're going to be a very wealthy man. He offered the placebo explanation. And Trophic Pharmaceutical is backing this thing 100%. Soon, cellulose will be distributed to children in third world countries everywhere. And our plans for you will know no bounds, Jeff. Next year, the Texas legislature. The year after, midterms in Congress. And 4 years beyond, the White House. A small smile tugged at Jeff's lips, even though worry still marred his handsome face. But the problem, he looked at Reed, you said we may very well end up like Troyevsky, and no offense, he said to Natasha, her father. What is that? I mean, I wasn't around when all this began, so why me? Because you didn't grow up in Schertz. Reed looked down at his hands. I don't get it. The vaccinations, Taylor. You didn't grow up in Schertz. You didn't get the vaccinations. Lou Jr. stated it like it should be obvious. Well, you do live in Schertz, and you do get the vaccinations, so what the hell does that have to do with anything? You included yourself on the list of those endangered. Taylor was tired of the half answers and runaround. We don't, Natasha said. None of us has ever taken the vaccine. But we're going to start, now, tonight. Reed stood up. What? But what about... Velma looked stunned, her words cut off by one look from Reed, and the sentence finished only in her own thoughts. The side effects. Velma, it's the only way. Do you want to end up like Andre? John? Velma shook her head, terror in her eyes. She now had a choice to make, and neither one was good. Reed looked at his son. Lou, get the syringes. He looked around the room. Velma will administer the shots, and Natasha. He pointed at her. You'll need to give Velma hers. I can do my own, thank you. The old nurse snapped at the colonel. Velma took the tray of syringes presented to her by Lou Jr. She ripped open an alcohol prep and approached Jeff Taylor. "Roll up your sleeve." She pulled on a pair of rubber gloves as he did, then proceeded to wipe clean one area of his bicep. A moment of conscience pricked her, but she suppressed it. She pinched the skin together and sunk the needle in, pushing the thick white liquid into his muscle. If one looked close enough, they'd notice tiny glowing blue particles floating around in the viscous mix, but only if the lights were out. Across town, two dark figures emerged for a moment from the copse of trees and brush behind the old Starlight Terrace booth. It was an abandoned drive-in theater, long overgrown and swallowed up by unintended shrubbery. The gate where cars would pass to buy tickets was rusted over and empty. The sign that once proudly proclaimed the name of the theater was torn down. It was a reminder of times gone by, replaced by the digital age and movie downloads on television and computers in the comfort of one's own home. The figures darted across the road, hidden in the dark, missed by passing headlights. They moved across the train tracks and disappeared into the residential area. On Wright Street, Velma Richards slammed her car door shut and went inside. She flipped on the living room light, laying her purse on the table. Her cat, Percy, greeted her, yowling for attention. "Hold on, cat," Percy meowed. Yes, I know." She patted his head and gave his gray fur a quick scratch before walking into her bedroom. Unsatisfied, he followed at her heels. "Mama needs to change." Velma patted the bed, and he jumped on. From there, Percy watched her every movement through large golden eyes. She took off her clothes, tossing the pants, nylons, and underthings into the hamper. But the blouse she wore beneath her sweater and the sweater itself were wadded up into a ball she placed inside a plastic bag, hiding the stain. After throwing on her flannel pajamas, she took the bag with her through the kitchen and out the back door. Percy the cat wasn't allowed outside, so his golden eyes continued to watch his human with vigilance from the window as she opened the barbecue pit, placing the bag inside, and proceeded to douse it with lighter fluid. She struck a match and tossed it inside. The flames leapt high, but disappeared as she placed the lid on top. She stood back, making sure the vent was open, and then came back inside. The fire would burn out on its own once it consumed the plastic, the shirt, and the sweater. Percy was glad she finished this task. He wanted food, and he wanted attention. He jumped onto the countertop where Velma opened a can of Fancy Feast. She spooned it out into his bowl just the way he liked. As he dove in, Velma leaned down on her elbows, petting him. "They don't need to know, do they, Percy? Mama can't leave you. What would happen to you without me?" Percy glanced at her, then purred as he continued eating. "Damned old Reed. Did he seriously think I'd take that injection? The damned fool. All he did was condemn every last one of them." She watched as Percy licked the last of the food from his dish, then proceeded to lick his chops and begin cleaning his face. "It won't come here, Percy. Why would it? It's the Colonel that it wants." She picked Percy up off the counter and carried him into the living room. She sat down on the couch and picked up the remote control to find the evening news. The cat sat in her lap content. Outside, two shadows were drawn to the scent of the smoke in the air like a moth to a flame. They paused, then headed toward the source, moving fast. Trent Wilkins sat in his daughter's living room watching Friday Night Lights. It was Danny's favorite movie about football, next to Rudy and All the Right Moves. For the first time he could recall, Archie joined them, and Danny seemed okay with it. Trent watched as those two chattered about what came next in the flick. He didn't know what changed recently, but from where he was sitting, it was a good thing. Even his daughter Mary seemed happy. Yes, it was a very good thing. When Archie got up to go grab a beer, he stopped. "Hey, Trent, you ready for another?" Trent's eyebrow twitched, but he fought the urge to look surprised, even though he was surprised. It was no secret that he and Archie had not managed to get along since the man came into his daughter's life. That was mostly due to how Trent saw the way he treated his grandson. As far as he knew, Archie never mistreated Mary. It was obvious he loved her, but part of loving her was loving her son, too. That's where the problem came in, and that's why Trent never warmed to him. Archie knew this, yet he continued his harsh treatment of Danny. It was childish to Wilkins' way of thinking. What was Archie trying to compete with the boy for? He already had Mary. It just seemed immature to be jealous of the attention a mother gives to her child. But tonight he saw Archie behaving differently. Tonight he finally seemed to get it, and it made Trent happy. "Don't mind if I do, Arch." He gave him a nod, and Archie smiled as he strode into the kitchen to grab 2 beers. "Do you think the coach will let me play in the playoffs, Grandpa?" Danny hopped up off the floor and landed on the couch next to him. "I don't see why not. The doctor cleared you," Trent said, looking at the boy with a smile. "Yeah, but what if that thing—" Trent clapped his hand over Danny's mouth before he could say something he was sure would reveal their conversation at the hospital. "I don't think that will happen to you again, son. It was probably a gas leak. That's what the news is saying." He gave Danny a look that said, "Shut up." "Sorry," Danny whispered. Mary looked over at them. "We'll see how it goes, Danny. It depends on how you're doing." "Oh, Mom, I'm doing fine. Look at me. I'm as healthy as a horse." "Now, but you weren't yesterday." "Don't baby him, Mary," Trent said. Archie walked back in and handed him a beer. Mary looked at Archie for help. He shrugged. "I'm with him," he said, pointing at Trent. Mary's mouth fell open. She'd never seen her husband and her father agree with each other. The movie credits rolled, and Danny hit the stop button. Regular television resumed as the nightly news aired.
And our top story tonight. The Air Force continues its investigation into the explosion at Samuel Clemens High School's football field 2 nights ago. No official word yet as to what caused the explosion, but Schertz Mayor Lloyd Webber speculated that it might be an old gas line left behind by the military before the land was developed for the school. The unofficial consensus seems to be that it may well have been a gas pocket that was triggered by Friday's storms. And in related news, an elderly resident has gone missing from her home in Schertz. A neighbor, concerned for her, called the police and asked them to do a wellness check. When they arrived, Ethel Green could not be located, but her clothes and some blood investigators believe to be hers were found on her bedroom floor.
They cut to an image of the woman.
A silver alert has been issued statewide. She's 75 years old, 5'5", and has gray hair and brown eyes. Green suffers from arthritis and allergies, according to her daughter, Rose. If you see her, please call the number on the screen immediately.
Trent sat up. Holy crap. He stared at the screen. "What's the matter, Dad? Do you know her?" Mary saw the alarm on her father's face. "What?" He looked at her. Yeah, sure," he said, trying not to get any more alarmed than he already was. "Hey, Danny, I'm going to have to call it a night. Your granddad ain't as young as he used to be. I need my beauty sleep, you know." He got up, leaving his beer on the coffee table. Mary started to get up, but he stopped her. "No need. The boy can walk me out. I'll call you tomorrow." He bent down and kissed her on the top of her head. Archie reached out to shake his father-in-law's hand. Trent took it and said, "Take care of them, Archie." He then grabbed his hat and walked outside to his truck. Danny followed. "What gives, Grandpa? Something's wrong. I can tell." Trent stood by his Chevy and placed his hands on Danny's shoulders. "Boy, remember what I told you yesterday?" "Yes, sir." "The geneticist that went missing? The bloody clothes, the sulfur smell, Oklahoma, what you and Jay went through?" He paused. "And now the woman on the news. It's here, boy, it's here, and it's out. I need you to stay inside. Don't go out on your own." "But, Grandpa—" "Danny, do as I say." He pulled him in for a tight hug. "I can't lose you. I can't lose any of you. I already lost your grandmother, so no more, you hear me?" Danny was scared. For his entire life, his grandpa had always been pretty easygoing, but tough. He wasn't afraid of anything, not even when Grandma passed on a few years ago, but now he was. And his fear infected his grandson, causing him to grow more worried. "You can't tell your mom. She doesn't need to be worked up over this, but you need to make sure she doesn't go out alone. Find ways to keep her inside until I tell you it's okay. Play he's sick or something, got it?" Danny fought back panic. He'd never seen his granddad like this. He was dead serious. Okay, Grandpa. I love you, boy, with all my heart. You remember that. Trent kissed him on the forehead and got into his truck. Grandpa? Trent gave the boy a small salute and drove off. Grandpa! Danny's throat grew tight as he stood there watching the taillights of the old Chevy driving away. They turned onto the next street and were gone from sight. He looked around, noting it was dark, and he was alone outside. A loud bang, like the sound of a trash can lid hitting the ground, sent him running back inside. Chapter 9. The day dawned gray and quiet, far cooler than usual for October in Texas. Rain began to fall, breaking the silence. A wail of an ambulance cut through the air while commuters made their way to work or school. As the day progressed, more sirens interrupted the usual sounds of the city of Schertz. Danny stood in the garage that afternoon looking out at the street. He tried to do what his granddad suggested and stay indoors, but the high-pitched wail of sirens, so many of them, kept pulling him out to look. He figured he was still technically in the house as long as he stayed in the garage, even if the door was up. His cell phone rang, playing Pharrell's Happy. It was Julie.
Danny, are you hearing all this?
Her voice contained anxiety. Yeah, they're over here too. I'm looking down my street now, but I don't see anything.
I saw a cop car go by here earlier.
Danny stuck his hand in his pocket. Where are you?
I'm in the front yard. There are some neighbors out. We're all looking to see where the police went.
Fear rose inside him. Julie, you need to get inside.
What? Why? What's going on?
Static interrupted the line briefly. Julie, can you hear me? Danny was shouting. He knew if it wasn't safe for him to be outside, it certainly wasn't safe for her.
I can hear you. Now, what were you saying?
Danny paced. Julie lived 3 streets over on Arrow. Julie, trust me, you need to go inside. Do it now. She laughed.
Are you worried about me, Danny? Come on. It's just police sirens.
A flash of light made him look up. A large blue orb streaked across the cloudy sky from behind his house, passing over and off toward the railroad tracks. Shoot! His mouth hung open and he took off running. Julie, get inside now! He was around the corner and in full-out sprint nearly to her street. The light pulsed around him like lightning on a dark night. He skidded as he turned the next corner. He could see her standing in her front yard looking up, still holding the phone to her ear. Julie! She turned and saw him running toward her. When he reached her, he grabbed her hand and pulled her to the front door. Danny, what the heck? She protested as he forced her inside. He went in after her and turned to lock the door. Close the curtains. He went around her house, pulling down blinds. Where's your mom? She's at work. Danny, you're acting like a lunatic. Did you see that light? What was that out there? Call her and tell her to stay put. Tell her not to go outside. It isn't safe. He peeked through the blinds. Another large blue orb passed overhead, slower than the first. Its light was pulsing. The thing was huge, but it made no sound. He called Jay. Hey, man, did you see that? Tell me you saw it. Jay was freaking out.
I saw it, man. It just passed over. Your grandpa wasn't kidding. This shit's for reals.
We need to check the news. There's got to be something on the news right now. He looked around for the remote to Julie's TV. Julie was on her phone talking to her mom when the television came on. A special report was airing from KSAT 12. The anchor went to a live feed from an on-site reporter who stood outside of City Hall.
Strange lights above Schertz are being reported in the last half hour. 2 were caught on camera by local residents.
The reporter cut to the B-roll showing the orbs streaking across the sky.
No report from the military if this is part of some training exercise. In fact, KSAT contacted Randolph Air Force Base directly to speak to a representative, and were told they have no comment. Strangely, we were given orders instead to get inside the nearest building and stay put.
How stupid are they? Danny looked at the screen in disgust. They were told straight out to get inside, and look at them, standing outside doing a report. He walked back to the blinds and looked out. What he saw sent him into a panic. Cold sweat covered the back of his neck. What's wrong, Danny? Julie stood behind him, trying to look over his shoulder. She finally saw it. Where her neighbors stood only 10 or 15 minutes ago, now were only a pile of clothes. Oh my God, Jay, it's Farley all over again. He still had his friend on speaker. I don't understand. They were just there. Why would they take off their clothes and leave them out there like that? Is that what people do from New York? Julie asked Danny. From New York? What do you mean? They just moved here last month. Danny couldn't see any of the other people who'd been standing out there when he ran up, but he didn't see any other piles of clothes either. Jay, I think we all need to be together. Can you get over here to Julie's?
What? No way. I'm not going outside. Are you crazy?
Jay was beyond scared. We'll meet you halfway. Come get us. Don't leave me hanging out there, man. Danny hung up, giving Jay no choice. He grabbed Julie's hand. Come on, we have to make a run for it. Where are we going? She grabbed her house key and followed him outside. We're going to meet Jay. He'll be swinging by to pick us up, and then we're going to my grandpa's. I'm worried about him. Danny, I'm scared. Julie looked at him with big brown eyes. He turned to her, reaching out. He held her face and said, Me too, but I'm not going to leave you alone. I'll protect you. Do you trust me? His eyes searched hers, looking for some hint that his words had managed to soothe her and allay her fears just a little. If she was less afraid, then she might be able to calm down a little too. Julie, feeling overwhelmed and terrified, stood on tiptoe and placed a brief, shy kiss on his lips. I trust you. Danny was stunned, humbled that she trusted him to protect her, and overjoyed that they'd finally shared a kiss. But reality came crashing down in the middle of this auspicious moment when another large blue orb passed overhead. They both looked up, expecting disturbances in the air, loud noise, but there was neither. Instead, it was like being in the eye of a hurricane, eerily quiet, like that split second before disaster strikes. Danny wrapped his hand around Julie's wrist and yelled, Run! Trent Wilkins pulled the box down from the shelf in his closet. It was dust-covered and shoved to the back behind some old wedding photo albums. He blew the dust off, coughing as it went airborne, filling his mouth with grit. He lifted the lid and reached inside to pull out the package addressed to him. The postage was dated December 1963, 19 months after the incident that changed his life. On the bottom, left-hand corner, the words, For Emergency Only, were written in black marker. The sender's name, Dr. Andrei Troyevsky. Trent glanced out his window at the gray sky, noting another blue orb flying over. Well, this certainly is an emergency, Doc, he muttered. He ripped the package open and looked inside. There in the box, amid wadded-up, yellowed newspaper, was an old tape recorder. Trent pushed the play button, but nothing happened. Dead batteries. He pulled it out and turned it upside down to find the battery compartment. He popped the latch. 2 AA batteries. He went to the kitchen and pulled open the utility drawer. In any kitchen, this was the junk drawer. The drawer you tossed your odds and ends things inside like a flashlight, the kitchen shears, and batteries. As luck would have it, he had a pack he kept in the house for the TV remote control. After replacing the old batteries, he sat down at the kitchen table and pushed the play button again. The whirring sound of the tape rolling reached his ears, and the voice of Dr. Troyevsky came on. Trent was transported back in time to the warm summer night, standing guard outside an underground bunker in the middle of a field. Sergeant Wilkins, I hope you never have to listen to this recording, but if you do, if that time comes, it's because they've returned. They've come back for their own. Sergeant Trent, I'm sorry about all of this. I'm sorry for what the military put you through. It wasn't your fault that you got caught up in the middle of this mess. However, you're probably going to be the only hope mankind has if they come back. Those involved won't help, won't be able to help. They'll be targets. That includes me. If they come back, if they are there with you now, I'm probably already dead. If that's the case, I need you to know 2 very important things. 1, they aren't friendly. One thing we learned is that they came here initially on a scouting mission to seek us out and discover our weaknesses. Instead, they crashed. Instead, we did to them what they intended to do to us. The others, its people, if you will, won't be happy about this. What we did to that creature, the one still left alive, was beyond inhumane. It was torture. But what we discovered was invaluable. Their DNA contains cures to more human illnesses than I can convey in this recording. The mapping of it is like nothing I've ever witnessed nor will witness again. We hope to use it to help people, cure heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. That day when the military bombed the bunker, I thought we'd lost it all. But then I found out later that Colonel Reed instructed the bomb specialist to grab the research before he set the explosives and came back out. He smuggled them under his hazmat suit. Can you believe it? Those documents were handed off to your superior, Sergeant House, who kept them until the FBI went back to D.C. From there, Reed and I continued to run experiments. Some of the results were disastrous. We found out that only children could handle the serum we manufactured. Since their bodies are still in a state of flux, still growing and changing, the alien DNA can integrate into their systems, subtly change it, building antibodies that fight off diseases, keeping metabolism within healthy norms. But that wasn't the case for adults. The adult specimens couldn't handle it at all. By adulthood, the human body has already gone through all major physiological changes, and the process of obligatory asymmetric replication of somatic cells slows down. The alien DNA attacked these cells, escalating the aging process and bringing about death much sooner than they otherwise would experience. It also tore down their immune systems, allowing all manner of bacteria and viruses that would usually not be harmful to a body to become as dangerous as being exposed to massive amounts of radiation and disease all at once. Their deaths were horrific, painful to watch. Knowing this and finding no way around it, we developed a serum that can only be administered to children. Once they have it, they can receive it for life, but not adults. They weren't exposed as children. Giving them the serum is the equivalent of a death sentence. The voice on the tape paused before continuing. Reed is running with this. He says he'll be rich, but I just don't know at what cost. There's still a side effect even in children administered this serum. It completely alters their own DNA at the deepest cellular level. They become alien. Shit! Trent let out the expletive before he had time to think. Danny had been receiving these injections since he was a child, and so had his daughter Mary. He thought for a moment. Archie? No, Archie wasn't from Schertz. He didn't get them. Maybe that's why they couldn't ever conceive a child together. He knew they'd tried. He knew Mary wanted another child. It was disappointed when it didn't happen. The voice droned on. If these creatures return, they'll recognize their own. But I don't want to know how they'll react to the hybrids we've created. The next thing I need to tell you about, Trent, is their weaknesses. They do have them. So listen carefully, because this might just save your life and the lives of those you love. But be warned, I have no idea how this will affect those who've been changed by the serum. This is what you need to know. Dad, what are we going to do? Lou Reed Jr. looked at his father, the colonel, who sat at the other side of his desk at the bank. All his years, his father seemed larger than life to him. When he wore his uniform, the men stopped to salute him as he walked by. Louis Reed stood 10 feet tall in his son's eyes. Now he looked deflated. The colonel was old, crippled with arthritis, and shrinking in on himself. There was still a spark of steel in his blue eyes, but his voice didn't carry the same bark. And the miles he'd traveled were road-mapped all over his wrinkled face. Still, he rallied in the face of the impending threat against them. Son, there isn't much we can do. If Andre were still here, I could call on him for help. He'd know what to do. He'd have some tricks up his sleeve. But the truth is, we won't be able to defeat them. But you said we'd be safe if we took those shots. Lou leaned forward on his desk, desperation in his words. I lied. What? Why? Lou sat back stunned. To save you all, Lou, he began. Son, those shots aren't going to save us. They'll kill us. I made sure we had triple the dose. You, me, Velma, Natasha, the mayor, and even Jeff Taylor. We're all going to die within the next 48 hours. It'll be quick, Lou. You'll just grow old and tired fast, and then you'll pass. I won't lie, though. It's going to hurt. No way around it. And I'm sorry for that. but it'll be better than what those things will do if they get hold of us. We'll just have to stay indoors, be vigilant until we can't rise." Lou stared at his father, growing more horrified as the seconds passed. "But what about Jenny?" Lou glanced at the photo of his wife on his desk. "What about my kids? I can't leave them to suffer. I need to protect them. Damn you, Dad!" He pounded his fist on the desk and stood up, unsure of what to do. Reed sighed. "They'll be all right. Jenny grew up here. She had those injections since she was a child. And your kids have had them too. They won't be targeted by the creatures." Lou looked at his father like he was a complete stranger. Everything he was revealing at the moment had been kept from him. He'd never been allowed to have those shots. His father was one of the few parents who refused to sign the slip for vaccination day, even though he was a big part of bringing the program to the city. But when his own 2 boys were born, suddenly the colonel was okay with it. He never understood why. They moved to Schertz when he was just a teenager. The vaccinations began several years later when Lou Jr. was about to graduate high school. His wife Jenny was 6 years his junior, and she'd had those shots pretty much since it all began. He leaned down and got in his father's face. "You better explain yourself." Reed reached up and patted Lou's face. "The creatures won't attack their own. When we started the vaccination program, you were already too old for the serum to work. Cellulose would have ended your life then. That's why I never let you take those shots. I always told you not to. It works on children, somehow meshes with their DNA. Andre could have explained it better, but they got him. They're after all of us now, those of us that dissected their own and tortured the one that lived." "Jesus Christ, Dad, how the hell do they even know who you all are? And why me? Why Natasha or Velma or Lloyd or Jeff? They weren't there. I wasn't there." "They know the same way a bloodhound knows. They can smell us. They follow the scent. And my scent is all over you, all over those who've been around me. But the ones who've had the shots, they won't hurt. In that respect, they're like us, protecting their own." Lou put his hands over his face. He suddenly felt very tired and needed to sit down. He shuffled over to his desk, noticing as he did that his back hurt, and he was slightly hunched over. When he reached his seat, he had to grip the arms of the chair to steady himself. The shakiness in his hands made him look down. Liver spots sprouted over the backs of them. They weren't there an hour ago. He felt panic rise up inside him like a bile. "I need to call Jenny." The catch in his throat tore at Reed's heart. Knowing he was responsible for killing his only son brought a pain to his soul that would not go away. Nor should it, in his opinion. He deserved every bit of it. "Call her. Tell her to stay inside and don't come out for any reason." "But you just said they won't attack her or the boys." "They won't, but they might take them." "Oh, dear God!" Lou dialed out, the panic inside him erupting. The Chevy truck rolled to a stop, and Danny helped Julie in before climbing in next to her. Jay peeled out, looking at the sky as he drove. It was darker now, thick with gray clouds. It felt like twilight arrived early. "Where to? We can't stay out here, man." Jay glanced at Danny. "Head over to Grandpa's." Danny put on his seatbelt and then put his arm around Julie since there was no seatbelt in the middle. He held on tight. "My mom and dad are still at work. Should I call them or what?" Jay's dark brown eyes showed fear. "Yeah, you should. And tell them to stay there, that you'll be with me at my grandpa's. That'll help them not worry so much." Jay turned onto Aviation and drove up to the 200 block. They were close to the park and to FM 1518 if they needed to get out of town in a hurry. But as they pulled up to park in front of his granddad's house, they saw a line of military vehicles driving off the road ahead and onto the park grounds. Trucks stopped and soldiers began jumping out of the back and rushing in front of the motorcade lining up. They carried large weapons and were decked out in full combat gear. "Holy moly," Danny whispered. Julie squeezed his hand. "We have to get inside. We may not be able to stay here long." He jumped out, Julie and Jay followed, and they ran across the yard to the front porch. Trent heard the commotion and came to the door. He saw his grandson through the screen. "Danny, what the hell are you doing here? I told you to stay inside. Stay home. Where's your mother?" He quickly opened the door to let them in, and his mouth dropped open when he looked across the road at Pickerel Park. "What in tarnation?" "We just saw that, too. There have been giant blue orbs flying over Schertz, Grandpa. It's been all over the news." Trent looked at the kids, then back at the line of military men spaced apart every 10 feet, creating a perimeter. The line stretched further than he could see from where he was standing. "I know, boy, I know." "What are they doing, Mr. Wilkins?" Julie asked. "They're locking us down." He pushed them into the house. "What does that mean?" Jay stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do with himself. Trent gestured he should sit down. "It means, Jay, that first they surround the town, contain us. Then they're going to shut off our communications. We need to check the internet, our cell phones, and radios right now. In the meantime, I'll put out some old two-way radios I kept. We're going to need them." He walked into the hall and turned to look at them. All 3 kids were staring at him, mouths hanging open. "Well, get on it. We need to know what's going on as quickly as possible before we can't access any of it. And call your parents before you can't anymore. Tell them to stay wherever it is that they are, but make sure it's inside. Tell them to lock the door, especially you, Danny. I can't believe you left your mother alone." He muttered more words as he turned back around, heading into his bedroom to dig the radios out of storage bin in his closet. Chapter 10. Lloyd Webber walked into the bank on Main Street slower than usual. His knees were hurting, something fierce, and his back was affected. He noticed that his vision was blurred, even with his glasses on. At the age of 56, he felt more like 86 since he woke up that morning. The face that greeted him in the medicine cabinet mirror had a few more wrinkles here and there than before he laid his head down on his pillow the night before. The night he'd spent in an unscheduled meeting above the hardware store getting an injection of the very serum he'd been advocating for the health of the children of Schertz for the past 10 years. Over 30 years of military service brought him to the northeast side of San Antonio, and he liked the small-town atmosphere, deciding to spend his retirement as a resident. He fell so in love with the city, once known as Cutoff, that he got on the city council and then ran for mayor. He'd been active as mayor for the last 4 years, and during that time he came to know the Reeds well, especially Lewis Reed Sr. Both being retired military, they had quite a bit in common. The colonel helped him campaign for his seat on the city council, and then later for the mayoral office. It was somewhere in between that he let Lloyd in on the secret that kept native Schertz residents so healthy: cellulose. What he'd been told was that the serum was a product of a long-term government experiment, and that all mayors before him knew of it, had signed off on the human trials, but they were to be kept under wraps until enough years passed and no side effects revealed themselves. 2 years ago, old Reed honored him with an invitation to join the local Masonic Lodge. It was after his induction that his fortune took another good turn, and he was asked to become a team member for the vaccine once a deal was struck with Entrophic Pharmaceutical, stock options and all. It all sounded good until last night. He knew some of the story, but he had no idea about the origins. And this morning he'd awakened to a great deal of pain and a sudden full head of gray hair. Not a single strand of his naturally brown hair could be found. His wife was alarmed. His own dog ran from him and hid in the corner. Reed had some explaining to do. He shuffled like an old man across the lobby while the tellers, who usually gave him a wave, stared with their mouths agape. Mayor Webber forewent the perfunctory knock on Lou Jr.'s door and barged in. "Forgive the intrusion, Lou, but just where the hell is your dad?" Lloyd stopped and his eyes landed on the 2 men sitting inside the office. Mother of God! Lou Jr. sat behind his mahogany desk with his eyes closed. His hand was over his chest as he took in several deep breaths. Reed Sr. was slumped in one of the 2 chairs facing his son. His pants were wet. The strong smell of urine assaulted Lloyd's nose. "Come in and shut the door, Mayor," Lou Jr. panted. Lloyd ambled in, keeping to one side of the room as the door closed. "What in all that's holy has happened to you, Lou?" He stared at the son, who now looked the same age as his father. Worse, Reed Sr. appeared near death. "We have to call an ambulance." "We can't do that. There isn't a thing they can do anyway." Lou Jr. opened his eyes and tried to focus on Lloyd. His usually sharp sight blurred. "What the hell do you mean? Something is wrong with us. Look at you. Look at me." "And the Colonel." His voice trailed off. He felt weak and sat down opposite the old man who'd wet himself in the chair. "We're dying, Lloyd," Lou offered. "What?" Lloyd wondered if his hearing was failing, because he surely hadn't heard correctly. "You, me, Dad, Velma, Natasha, and Jeff, we're dying. Dad killed us. Killed us with that damn injection last night. He lied to us, Lloyd. Didn't even give us a chance." Lou went into a coughing fit. "I don't understand. He said that was the only thing that would protect us from the creature that got out. And in case you hadn't noticed what's been happening outside, there's some kind of damn invasion going on. I can't even believe it. God damn, Lou, there's alien ships flying overhead out there. They keep going toward FM 78 somewhere. And now the military has us surrounded. Just got a call before I came here that we're supposed to get inside and stay indoors. A freaking alien invasion in my city." Lloyd felt a sharp pain in his chest and reached up to grasp his shirt. "Lean back and breathe, brother. Easy." Lou Jr. waited until the pain expression eased from the mayor's face. Funny how Dad defined protecting us. What he really did was make sure we'd die before those creatures out there could get their hands on any one of us. We're aging fast and experiencing all the problems that come with all that at once. Horror replaced the pain in Lloyd's eyes. "How long do we have?" "Less than 2 days. He looked at his father, who was already in a semi-comatose state. "I think Dad has even less time. He was already old and sickly." Tears clouded his rheumy blue eyes, so clear only the night before. "But my wife, my kids!" Lou Jr. shook his head. "I don't know about your Virginia, Lloyd. She didn't grow up here, so she hasn't had the vaccine." "Yes, she has. She gets one every year." "No, it's not the serum. Records have been kept on every single resident, and those who didn't grow up here never got that serum. All they got was a standard flu shot and a vitamin B booster." "My kids!" Lloyd couldn't believe what he was hearing. "They got it. Kids can take it, but it changes them." "Changes them how?" Fear seeped into his now shaky voice. Lou leaned forward, tired and pained. "It makes them some kind of hybrid, kin to those creatures." Lloyd sucked in a breath and let out a wail. "No!" He began to weep for his children. "What does that mean? What's going to become of them?" "I don't know, Lloyd, but if I were you, I'd give Virginia a call. Make sure she and the kids stay inside until the military gives the all-clear." He pushed his phone toward his friend. Just as Lloyd reached to pick up the receiver, the lights went out in the bank. Lou looked up and around. "I'm sorry, old friend. It's too late." "Grandpa, the TV isn't working." Danny tried clicking the remote, but nothing happened. "They've cut the power." Trent came into the living room with the two-way radios in hand. "Why?" Jay stood up and ran to the window to look outside. "What's the point of that?" "To keep you from calling out or using computers," Julie said as she sat on the couch. Trent looked at the girl. He knew his grandson had a crush on her. He'd heard the boys talking about her over the last year. All he knew before today was that Danny thought she was pretty. But now he knew she was also smart. "Exactly right, Julie." "Yeah, but we still have cell phones. We can call out on them or use the internet anytime." Danny pulled his out, looking at it as he unlocked the screen. Then his face changed to consternation and confusion. "No signal, right?" Trent asked. "Yeah, but how'd you know?" Danny kept trying. "Because the military can scramble satellite signals. That's how I know." Trent checked the batteries in the radios. "They aren't going to let the outside world know what's happening here. Won't let them see what they're about to do. Jay turned around. What are they about to do? Trent looked up. They're going to exterminate those creatures. Or try, anyway. He popped out the old batteries and replaced them in one of the handhelds. And probably us along with them. What? Why would they do that? Jay's voice rose several octaves hearing this. Trent Wilkins stood and handed him the radio. Because, Jay, dead men tell no tales. What would we tell? Danny sat down next to Julie, feeling overwhelmed. The government doesn't want their secret out. They aren't going to let anyone tell outside news stations that aliens have landed in Schertz. The whole damn world would go into a mass panic. It'd be chaos. They're probably already working on an alibi for the lights you kids said were on the news earlier. They'll explain it away as either a training exercise from Randolph or some kind of rare weather phenomenon. Either way, those of us that know better can't be allowed to talk. Trent walked into the kitchen. Danny, do you know how to make this dang phone record? Danny followed his grandpa and saw him sit down in front of an old tape recorder. He was holding his own cell phone, a gift last Christmas from his mom who wanted to be sure she could contact her dad wherever he happened to be. You pull up the record on menu, Grandpa. He sat down in the chair next to his and found the proper screen. Good. I want you to hit record on that when I say. He looked at Julie and Jay. Don't speak until it's over. We won't, Julie said as she came in and jumped up onto the kitchen counter. Jay leaned against the wall. Trent looked at Danny and hit play on the recorder. Go. Danny hit record. As they sat in silence, all of them heard the words spoken by the now-deceased Dr. Andrei Troyevsky. When it was done, Danny and Trent both hit the stop buttons. The room was thick with silence as they all absorbed what they just heard. Now, said Trent, we drop the recorder off across the street. Danny, we keep this one, and I'll need you to hang on to it. It's your only protection now. If anyone threatens you, you send that recording out to as many news stations and websites as you can. You hear me? Danny nodded, wide-eyed. Now then, we head over to the hardware store. We have a couple of items to pick up. Like what? Danny was the first to speak. Like chlorine tablets, water guns, lighter fluid, and Bic lighters, and maybe some road flares for good measure. He stood and picked up some bags from the counter. You heard the doc. We have some weapons to make. Chapter 11. The commander stood before his troops, assessing the old man and the three teenagers. Major Frank Rames looked Trent in the eye. You're telling me you know how to kill them? The major gave good poker face. Exactly what is this them you're talking about, Mr. Wilkins? Trent glared at the officer. He knew what he was doing, lying straight to his face. On orders, of course. Don't give away the mission to anyone, especially civilians. None of us has time for this game, Major. The voice on that recording is the recently deceased Dr. Andrei Troyevsky. He's the geneticist that conducted the experiments on the very things you're here to hunt down and terminate. On that tape player, you'll hear exactly how you need to kill those creatures. He pointed at the rows of soldiers carrying machine guns and high-powered sniper rifles. He glanced at the urban tanks being unloaded from two 18-wheelers' trailers. All the firepower in the world isn't going to work on them. They're not made like us. Major Rames stood tall, shoulders squared. His caramel skin was creased here and there with a few wrinkles, mostly on his forehead and between his eyes. Too much responsibility and worry marred his expression. His shaved bald head wore a beret, Special Battalion Texas National Guard. They trained for this kind of large-scale disaster, but nothing could have possibly prepared them for this. Explain not like us. Major, it's all on the recording, but make no mistake in playing coy with me. I was one of the guards on duty when one of those things first killed one of ours. I was there at Ground Zero. I knew Dr. Troyevsky, and he sent me that recording years ago in the event of something catastrophic occurring like this. The information on that tape tells you what their weaknesses are. All I can ask is that you begin evacuating everyone now. No one knows what the hell is happening except you, me, and these kids. Oh, and Colonel Reed and his lackeys. Colonel Reed? Lewis Reed? The Major's question gave him away. Where is he now? I don't know. Either at home or over at the bank with his son, Lou Jr. We checked his home. Where's the bank? The Major turned and beckoned 2 soldiers over to his side. On Main Street. Why? Trent took one step back as the soldiers approached. Major Rames placed his hands on his hips, his expression serious. Because we have orders to detain him. Where are you headed from here? Trent didn't want to give away his own plan, so he lied. I have to get these kids reunited with their parents. Take these 2 men with you. Go straight to the bank first. Move fast because it won't be safe after sundown. Trent had a feeling once they got their hands on old Reed, they'd detain them too. He couldn't let that happen to the kids. He needed them to get out of town, but they needed weapons first. After that, he'd send them on their way and handle this himself. He didn't have any faith that the military would completely follow through with the job. The last time they had only 2 of these creatures, one dead, one alive, and they kept them for experimentation. Look where that got them. No, they'd try to do so again. He knew it, but they'd kill anyone in the know and blame it on some natural disaster like a massive explosion from a gas pocket. They already had the perfect setup, what with all that occurred over at the football field. He knew he'd need to proceed with caution. All right, I'll take you to him. Follow us. Trent turned to leave. No, you'll ride with my men. The Major nodded to the men who picked 2 more men out of the line to accompany them. They pointed toward a camouflaged supply truck. Trent sighed. This wasn't going to be easy. When they left the Major and reached the vehicle, he said, "The boy here needs to drive his own truck. He's supposed to pick up his mother. She doesn't have a car. So unless you want to drive them to the outskirts of town," he let that hang, hoping it would work. The young sergeant, who was the highest ranking of the 4, blew out a breath, but he assented. He looked at Jay. "Where's your truck?" Jay pointed across the street. "Right over there. Go get it. We'll drive up behind you. You lead." Jay turned and ran to his truck. Danny grasped Julie's hand, holding on for dear life. He knew the moment his grandpa lied to them that something was up, that they weren't safe with these men. "Come on, Danny. Let's take these gentlemen to the bank." Trent put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. It was small comfort. The look that passed between them was filled with unspoken words. Danny knew the hardware store was next door to the bank. Somehow they needed to ditch these soldiers and gather their supplies. But how? They had guns. Would they use them on kids? As they piled into the back of the supply truck with 2 of the soldiers, rain began to fall. The engine roared to life and they were jostled on the wood benches as the big truck rolled over the uneven ground of the park. It bounced when it rolled off the curb onto the road. Julie was flung hard into Danny, who wrapped his arms around her to keep her from tumbling onto the floor. Trent saw the look that passed between them. It reminded him of the first time he laid eyes on his Anne. She was the one, and it looked like Julie might just be the one for Danny. Seeing this doubled his resolve to end the threat to them once and for all. He knew it was going to take everything he had. It might even take his life. The truck slowed down and pulled onto Aviation. Their speed picked up again, and he knew they were following Jay. He hoped the boy was smarter than he looked as they made their way the few blocks over to Maine. So much was riding on one old man and 3 kids. It wasn't fair, but when was life ever fair? Trent sent a silent prayer heavenward that he'd get through this ordeal with just enough to make sure the kids and his daughter got out. Schertz was about to become a war zone. Fat drops of rain saturated the ground and rustled the leaves of the trees behind the old Starlight Terrace Drive-In Theater. The heavy clouds grew darker and the wind picked up. The gathering storm had arrived. Between the cracks of thunder and flashes of lightning, pulsing blue light lit up the branches of the trees. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, bringing it down into the 50s. A mass of dark, amorphous smoke emerged, passing through the low-hanging limbs and crossing the line beyond the rusted-out ticket booth. It swelled, growing larger until it was nearly half a mile wide. and it moved as if arms and legs, hands and feet, hundreds of them, made up its body. It began to advance, crossing the farm to Market Road and over the railroad tracks. The wind blew south, carrying the stench of sulfur like a warning to all those it reached. Jay pulled into the bank, swinging his truck around to the building beside it, and parking so he faced the exit back out onto Main. He waited as the camo truck pulled up behind him. Two of the soldiers jumped out of the back, followed by Mr. Wilkins, Danny, and Julie. He kept an eye on them through his side view mirror. Julie ran over to Jay's truck and hopped in. Danny began to follow, but one of the soldiers grabbed his arm and pointed to the back of the truck. "Wait in here." Trent was getting drenched, but he stood tall. "The colonel's here. That's his car parked right there, the maroon Buick." The sergeant indicated Trent should join his grandson in the back of the truck, under the tarp and out of the rain. "We'll be right back." He barked orders at one of the men. "Bryant, keep guard over these civilians." The young man stood at attention, eyes averted, and responded. "Yes, sir." He took position, standing just outside the back of the truck in the rain. The other three soldiers hustled in formation inside the bank. Once they were out of sight, Danny whispered to his grandfather, "What are we going to do? How are we going to get away?" Trent raised his hand halfway, shushing Danny. He looked at their guard, and then outside of the truck. Wind blew and rain fell. It would just be a short matter of time before the other three came back outside, and then it might be too late to act. He considered overpowering the young soldier, but at his age that might be a far more foolish risk than he was willing to take. He looked around the floor of the truck for anything he could use as a weapon. Nothing. His eyes burned. A foul smell hit his nose. Trent looked up as Danny, too, sniffed the air. Fear entered his eyes. The soldier looked around for the source of the smell. Trent watched him and spoke. "It's them." "Who?" He glanced around, blinking as the ripe smell made his eyes begin to water. "The creatures. That's what they smell like. Or didn't your commander warn you?" Trent leaned out, trying to see around the tarp. "Stay inside the truck, sir." The soldier cocked his weapon and peered around the side. He took a few steps, disappearing from view. Trent wasted no time. He slipped out and waved his hand at Danny to follow him. They went around to the other side of the truck along the wall of the building adjacent to the hardware store, coming up on the passenger side of Jay's Chevy. Julie jumped when she saw them and scooted over. Danny climbed in next to her and tried to make room for his grandpa. "No, Danny, lean down. Jay, you drive out of here fast. Go around the corner to the back. Quick. Let them think I'm with you. I'll run into the store. Turn your radio on. Go." Jay hit the gas, peeling out and making a shaky right-hand turn. The soldier came running behind him, taking aim at the truck as he shouted, "Stop!" He fired, but Jay made another hard right, disappearing from sight. Trent hid between the supply truck and the wall. The soldier was too busy cussing and running back toward the bank and didn't see him. He'd have some explaining to do inside. As soon as he saw the young man enter the double doors, he ran around the corner and ducked inside Sipple's. He was met by the shocked face of Clive Howard. "Jesus Christ, Trent, what's going on out there?" The older man stood behind the counter, pale with concern. "Clive, we don't have much time. I need these supplies as fast as you can help me grab them." Trent threw his credit card at him. "Put the balance on my card. After we get them, you need to get out of town. Don't ask too many questions. It's best you don't know, but get your wife and drive out of Schertz." The man moved slowly, sputtering his confusion. "What do you mean? Why the heck are the lights and phone lines down? Trent, I won't be able to ring you up, not without electricity. I'm sorry. I won't be able to sell to you until it comes back on." Trent took 5 deliberate steps and grabbed Clive by his shirt. "It's not coming back on, Clive. That's the military out there. They just took a shot at my grandson. There's shit going down. And they're about to start a war out there. It's a damn invasion, Clive. An invasion by a hostile force. Now keep my damn card. Help me get the stuff I need to protect my own, and then get the hell out of town, because if you stay, you're all going to die." Clive looked like a fish out of water the way his mouth opened and closed. No sound came out at first. If things hadn't been so serious, Trent would have laughed at how ridiculous the man looked. The man in question sucked in some air. "Now calm down, Trent." He backed away, straightening his shirt. He'd never seen Wilkins so riled, never witnessed him behave erratically at all. It was what convinced him the situation was serious. And if Trent said he needed to get out of town, he needed to hurry. "What do you need?" Trent pulled out a list. Clive looked it over. "I don't have any water guns." "Then spray bottles will do. Don't care if they're empty or full. I can dump out the contents." "I have a paint sprayer. Would that work?" Clive asked. Trent smiled. "Gas-powered?" Clive nodded. "Yes, that would work far better than the water guns, as a matter of fact." Clive looked at the rest of the items on the list. "I don't understand. Why do you need chlorine tablets?" "'Cause I'm going to get rid of some stinking sulfur." It was the closest bit of truth he could share. "Well, that'll do it. How many paint sprayers do you need?" "How many have you got?" Trent raised a bushy eyebrow. "I've got 3. "Then 3 it is. And don't forget the lighter fluid." Clive ambled over to grab the items. "I'm not even going to ask about that one." Trent smiled as he followed with his bags opened, ready to toss in the supplies. "Probably best that you didn't, Clive." They worked fast, grabbing everything within 5 minutes. Trent began carrying the gas-powered sprayers toward the back of the store. He radioed the kids to come to the back door. "Is it open, Clive?" Clive looked out the front, wondering why Trent didn't go back out the way he came in, but remembered the gunshot. "Yeah, it's open." He walked around him, reaching the door. He opened it and saw the truck with the 3 kids sitting inside. "Yours?" he asked. "Yeah, mine. Got to get them out safely." Jay and Danny jumped out and grabbed the bags and the sprayers, loading them into the back of the truck. "You got a tarp I can throw over that stuff?" Clive nodded. "I do. Hold on." He ambled up to the shelf, pulling down a plastic package containing a painter's tarp. "This ought to do it." "I owe you big, Clive. Keep my card. When it's all said and done, you just ring this all up. And I mean what I said. Lock up and go get your wife and get the heck out of Dodge. All hell is about to break loose." Trent shook his friend's hand and then squeezed into the truck. Julie had to sit on Danny's lap to make room, but he somehow didn't think the boy minded at all. As they drove out of the back parking lot and hooked a right onto Exchange, Trent saw Clive locking the back door and running to his car. Major Rames railed at the sergeant and his men. "What the hell do you mean you lost them?" "I left Bryant to guard them while we went inside to retrieve the colonel. The next thing I knew, Bryant came running inside with word that they snuck out." Rames turned his wrath onto Bryant. "What do you have to say for yourself, Private?" The young man swallowed, then spoke. "They were in the back of the truck, the old man and the grandson, sir. Then we all smelled a very strong odor of sulfur. The old man said it was the enemy. I went around the side of the truck to investigate, and the next thing I knew, they were driving off in the other boy's vehicle. I took a shot, but I missed, sir." Rame's eyes grew large with disbelief. He turned back to his sergeant. "And just why the hell were they not all inside one of our trucks?" The sergeant paled, knowing he screwed up. "I allowed the other boy to drive his vehicle. You didn't say we needed him and the girl too, sir." The major exploded. "Am I surrounded by incompetent morons? Are you deliberately trying my patience, Sergeant?" "No, sir." The man stood at attention, eyes averted to just a spot beyond his superior's head. Rames paced, stopping. He turned back around. "And what of the colonel? Did you lose him too?" "No, Major. We have him and his son, and an unidentified male civilian." "Where? Show me." "I have some questions for the colonel." The major indicated the sergeant should lead the way. He followed the man to the truck. When the flap of the camouflage tarp was lifted, he stopped. "He won't be able to answer, sir. I think he's dead." Inside, 3 men lay on the floor side by side. They looked like old men, all of them. 2 were still breathing, but it became obvious after a few moments that the oldest one was not. The other 2 men didn't look far from joining him. The major stepped back. "Did you get anything out of these 2? "The son identified himself, but his speech is weak. He just kept saying, 'They're here and you're too late.' The other man doesn't seem to be able to speak anymore. He's just drooling and his breathing is shallow. I think he may have suffered a stroke." "Call an air evac. Let's get them out of here." "What of the others at the bank?" "We told them to stay inside and lock the doors until otherwise notified by us." The sergeant picked out one of his men to carry out the task of calling in a medical chopper. Rames nodded. "Well, you did one thing right. We need to start the rollout. Get 10 vehicles to travel the blocks and tell the residents to stay inside, lock up, and hunker down." "Yes, sir." The sergeant saluted and left. Rames pulled out his sat phone and called into base. "This is Major Frank Rames. Please inform the general that Operation Urban Termination will begin at sundown." He turned to the corporal standing by. "Get the men ready." The corporal ran to the middle of the field, stopped, and raised a bullhorn. "Attention!" Everyone grew quiet. "The operation is in effect. I repeat, the operation is in effect." Several men scrambled and began going down the line, handing out gas masks. It was 1 hour until sundown, and counting. Chapter 12. Trent directed Jay to drive over to Danny's house. They needed to get Mary. She was probably worried sick about the boy who ran off a few hours ago. And he was right. She came running out as soon as they drove up. "Danny, where the heck have you been?" Anxiety set her face into an expression full of anger, fear, and relief. She saw her dad and stopped. "Dad, what's going on? Have you seen the news? I tried to find out more, but the dang electricity went off." She popped open her umbrella and ushered the kids into the garage. "We've seen it, Mary. Did you hear from Archie yet?" Trent shook himself like a dog once they got out of the rain. His daughter grabbed a towel from the laundry room and handed it to him. "He called. I was talking to him, and then the phone went dead, too. I can't seem to get any signal on my cell phone." Trent rubbed his hair dry and wiped his face. He stopped and looked at his daughter. "Mary, it's serious. The military has surrounded Schertz at all major entries and exits. As soon as the sun goes down, it's going to be too dangerous to be here. I need you to take the kids and get out. Now." "What? What's going on? Why do I need to leave my home, Dad?" "Damn it, Mary, listen to me. The hole in the football field, Danny and Jay being gassed, the orbs flying overhead, the National Guard here. It's all related, and it ain't no joke. If you stay, you're going to die. What the military is about to do is bad, and they're not even trying to evacuate. They can't. They can't let people outside of Schertz know what's going on here. Take Danny and Julie." He looked at the boy who was his grandson's best friend in the world. "And Jay, you follow them. Take Borgfield Road up past Dobie Middle School and get to Cibolo. Once you're there, you can take 1103 out to I-35 and just go." Mary stood stunned. She couldn't believe what she was hearing, and yet she knew she still wasn't hearing all of it. "But, Dad, what about you?" Tears filled her eyes. Trent hugged his daughter. She looked so much like her mother, and his heart broke, thinking this may be the last time he would hold his little girl. "I have to stay and finish this. Should have finished it somehow years ago." "But the military—" She sniffed, trying to look up at her dad. He held her tighter. "They won't do it, not completely. They'll kill the wrong people and save the monsters. I can't let them do that. I have to get to them first." "But how? How will you be able to do this on your own?" He stepped back and looked down into her face, a face more precious to him with every passing moment. "Don't worry. I know what to do. Just get the kids out of here. Do this for me. I won't be able to do what needs doing if I'm worried about you all." He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Mary." Tears blinded her. "I love you too, Dad." She hugged him again. Danny threw his arms around both of them, and Julie and Jay dogpiled in. Trent pushed his daughter gently away. "Now, I have to get some things to prepare." Danny emptied the bags onto the floor of the garage. "We're going to help you first, Grandpa." "Danny, there's no time." "Grandpa, we're helping." He turned to his mom. "Go grab us some clothes, and by the time you're ready, we'll leave." He took Julie's hand, kissing it. "Would you mind helping my mom?" She gave him a teary smile. "I don't mind." She went inside with Mary Edwards. Danny turned back to his granddad. "Okay, Grandpa, here's the deal. There's no way we're letting you do this on your own. No disrespect, sir, but you're kind of old. Jay and I can run fast. We're strong, and we know what we're facing. We're helping you, so no arguments." Trent sputtered, but then he saw the resolve in his grandson's eyes. He looked at Jay, who stood by his friend. He might be more scared than Danny, but he wouldn't leave his friend's side, loyal till the end. "Damn it, boy, open that package." Quickly, they dropped chlorine tablets into 2 of the 3 paint sprayers. They filled them with water from the hose, and then poured cans of lighter fluid into the 3rd one. Danny had a couple of old water guns in a box in the garage, so they loaded those up with chlorinated water too, just in case. They put the sprayers onto the back of Jay's truck, along with a can of gasoline. Jay and Danny carried a water gun, and Trent found Archie's blowtorch among his tools. They piled into the Chevy and drove off, leaving a note behind for Mary. "We'll meet you at the McDonald's on I-35 and FM 3009 in 1 hour. Get there quick. And Danny asked that you order him his usual. Dad." For the 2nd time that day, Trent lied. The daylight began to wane. It didn't really have far to go until complete darkness, with all the gray clouds and rain making it dreary all day. Jay followed Trent's instructions to park a short way down from the Starlight Theater, and they stopped and picked up a 2nd canister of gasoline from Jay's house. "Okay, here's what we got to do. Andre said these things can't handle fire or chlorine. Basic chemistry, he said, for creatures that are sulfur-based. So we're going to go around the backside and leave a trail of gas. Danny, you pour that out every couple of feet. Be sparing because we don't have much. Jay, you spray the lighter fluid on the trees in between where he pours. Between the 2, we should be able to start a good wall of fire, even in this rain." "Then what, Grandpa?" Danny eyed the sky, noting the growing darkness and the consistent sprinkle. The rain had let up a bit. It wasn't a downpour any longer, but that could change in an instant. It was Texas, after all. "Then we're getting out front over there. If any of them escape the fire, we have to take them down." "What if they're not in there?" Jay asked the one question for which no one had an answer. Trent took a deep breath. "Well, then we cut off their way home with the fire. That's for sure." "That's going to make them mad, ain't it?" Jay's eyes were wide as he stood wiping his black hair back from his face. "Yeah, I imagine so." Trent reached into the back of the truck and grabbed the canister of gas. He handed it to Danny. Jay helped him lift the paint sprayer full of lighter fluid. They grabbed 2 road flares and palmed a few lighters each. "But at least they won't be making it back to their damn mothership or whatever. All we can hope for is that these things get the idea that if they come here, we're going to kill them, and that they should stop coming here." All 3 hurried back around behind the dense crop of trees. They could see pulsing blue lights emitting intermittent flashes. The scent of sulfur lingered on the air, but it wasn't terribly strong, which meant they weren't close by, or perhaps they were inside their crafts. Either way was fine with Danny, who tried to push down his rising fear. Mary Edwards was mad as hell. She wanted to go after them, but had no idea where they'd gone. Julie didn't know either. She looked at the girl and knew she needed to get her out. A large military truck rolled down her street. It was telling people to get inside, lock their doors, and stay put until otherwise notified by them that it was safe to come back outside. They cited a gas leak in Schertz as the danger, but Mary knew this was a lie after what her father told her. Julie filled her in on the rest after they came out, hands full of clothes and other items for short-term travel, and found the note left by Trent. She was in shock, and yet it all somehow made far more sense than the fib the National Guard was spewing. Once the truck went over to the next street, Mary knocked on as many neighbors' doors as she could. She tried to convince them that they needed to get out. Some believed her after what they saw on the news, while the older ones wouldn't listen and slammed their doors in her face, locking them. She did what she could. The ones who believed her went to tell their family and friends. Soon, the streets would be clogged with panic-stricken residents. She jumped into her car, and she and Julie sped off to Borgfield Road. No one knew to come that way, not yet anyway. They made it out of the city and headed toward the interstate. The stink of gas filled Danny's nostrils. It took half an hour, but they managed to saturate enough of the backside of the tree line as possible. Trent flicked the Bic, looked at the boys, and then leaned down to light a pile of leaves. Thankfully, it was barely sprinkling at the moment. It took a few tries, but finally smoke plumed and flames erupted. They lit and tossed the road flares into the brush. In another minute, those flames licked along the line of gasoline, hungry for more. The flames traveled back the way they'd all just come from, climbing higher. As they rose higher, embers flew into the trees and hissed as they caught, burning brighter as they consumed the combustible fluid. Trent and the boys backed up, heading to the truck to get the rest of the supplies, and set themselves up in front by the road. The fire was spreading fast now. The smell of sulfur grew stronger. Major Rames double-checked that his men were in place. The speed at which they'd adjusted their strategy and tactics with the new information provided by Trent Wilkins was astonishing. But then, they were military men. Adjust, adapt, and overcome was the motto of all men trained in combat. The fence surrounding the pool in Schertz Park had been torn down. The shirt worn by Colonel Reed was stripped from his body before the medical chopper flew him and the other two old men out. Lou Reed Jr. explained what he could before he went unconscious. He probably wouldn't survive the flight to Fort Sam's hospital. Rames gave the order, and one of the men put the shirt in the pile next to the pool. He struck a match and set it on fire. Once it was going up in flames, all the men fell back, hidden in the dark. A loud screech, like the sound an owl makes before it swoops down on its prey, sounded. It was unsettling. The wind shifted, and the stink of sulfur rapidly grew to overpowering proportions. The men waited. The battle was about to begin. Beyond the road that separated the park from the rows of residential streets, a black mass swarmed. It moved as one entity until it entered the park grounds. Drawn to the scent emitted from the burning shirt, several black masses broke away from the core and ran with great speed to investigate. As they approached the flames, they stopped and stood back, hopping over each other, incensed. It was clear they wanted to get closer, but were afraid of the fire. The swarm behind them moved closer. Rames viewed the scene through night vision binoculars. He raised his hand and kept it up. The leader of the next group down raised his hand, and down the line they went until all the way to the other side of the pool. Hands were up. Men crouched, ready to spring into action. Overhead, the near-silent drone of 3 AH-64 Apache helicopters approached. Seconds ticked by. The Apaches opened fire. Flames shot out as flammable chemicals sprayed the ground around the mass of amorphous creatures. High-pitched screeches of shock and anger filled the air as the mass swiftly moved left, right, and back. It reacted to the exploding ground and leaping pyres by shrinking in on itself. Several broke away and took off running. One group fell back, tumbling into the pool, where they screamed upon coming into contact with the chlorinated water. Their bodies hissed and burned like snails sprinkled with salt. Rames brought his hand down fast. Hands came down around the line, and the soldiers rose up, cocking their guns adapted to launch canisters of chlorine gas. Others had flamethrowers. They advanced on the aliens, who now turned, seeing their attackers. The black smoke surrounding them cleared, and their putrid brownish-gray flesh was revealed. They had no eyes. The way they moved indicated that they relied on sound and scent to locate their prey. The fetid holes that could only be their mouths opened wide, wider still as they threw back their heads, howled high-pitched battle cries, and attacked. Shots rang out, canisters flew and exploded at the feet of the monsters. Yellowish-green smoke plumed and settled low to the ground like an eerie, glowing fog. As the creatures rushed through, they came into contact with it and burned. Furious, some tried to muddle through but fell, becoming completely covered, burning alive. Others backed away and made for the residential areas. Soldiers took off running after them. The Apaches flew over again, using infrared to target the enemy, and laid down ground fire. Homes caught and went up in flames. People came running outside, human fireballs that fell onto their front lawns, kicking and screaming, then going silent. The chase was on through the streets of Schertz. Behind the starlight, flames rose 30 feet as a wall of fire consumed the trees and brush. One pulsing blue orb tried to fly out, but, covered in flames, quickly crashed, obliterating the Dairy Queen. The explosion shook the ground. High-pitched, angry screeches filled the ears of the old man and the 2 teenage boys standing at the ready along the roadside. "Here they come, boys. Hold steady and wait for my order." Trent stood at point with Danny on his right and Jay on his left. He had the paint sprayer containing lighter fluid in his left hand and the small blowtorch in his right. It was lit and ready to go. The boys each had sprayers full of chlorinated water. What they had wasn't much, but what they had needed to count. They could hear the commotion coming from the park all the way to where they stood, and it sounded like it was now coming closer. That meant they'd soon have the enemy at their back. The smell of sulfur grew thicker as 5 black masses emerged from the trees. One passed through the ticket booth, and all stopped, seeming to sniff the air. They turned in sync in their direction. "Oh, Jesus!" Jay couldn't hold back his fear or his words. "Keep it together, man. I'm here with you." Danny's voice shook, but he tried to offer some courage to his friend. "Steady, boys. They're going to charge. When they do, aim the sprayers and don't let up, you hear?" Trent kept his eyes on the front 2 creatures as they cocked their heads like dogs from left to right. The smoke surrounding them fell away to lighter wisps, revealing their true forms. "Shit!" Danny sputtered. "Shit indeed." Trent didn't even bother to reprimand his grandson's language, since it echoed his own feelings exactly. 2 creatures approached cautiously, continuing to cock their heads, sniffing the air. The smell rolling off them in waves made Trent's eyes water. Danny blinked rapidly, and Jay lifted his arm to wipe his face with his sleeve. "I think I'm going to be sick, Mr. Wilkins." Jay sounded dangerously close to vomiting. "Swallow it down, boy. That's an order." Trent didn't want to be harsh, but he needed to be to save them all. He didn't see any more than the 5 in front of them come out. That meant the rest of them were behind him. He hoped the stubborn major had listened to him. If not, they were all going to be dead soon. The 2 creatures drew close, finally in range. Trent steeled himself. "Boys?" "Yes, sir," they both answered. "Now!" Trent pulled the spray handle and then touched his torch to the stream, creating an instant flamethrower. He hit the first alien. It lit up like a bright blue torch, but the second broke left, evading the fire. "Jay, get him!" Danny screamed. Jay let loose with the chlorinated water. At first he missed, then doused the thing. Its skin smoked as it screamed, sizzling and hissing. It tried once again to come at him, but Jay hit it in the face as it opened its mouth to howl. The chlorine water went down its throat, choking it. It gurgled as it fell over. 2 down. The remaining 3 bobbed up and down, screeching like angry owls. They began running straight at Danny, Trent, and Jay. Danny aimed high, arching his spray until it hit the closest one. He kept adjusting, keeping the creature under the fall of the chlorine until it fell over, rolling, screeching, and dying. The second one came at Trent, who aimed the stream of fire at it. The creature dodged, and the paint sprayer sputtered, running out of lighter fluid. The third creature came at Jay, zigzagging in its approach. He kept trying to hit the thing, but missed. Although they couldn't see, their other senses gave them the same information. They'd adapted. They knew they needed to avoid being hit by the fire and water. Danny ran to help his friend, adding his own spray to counter. When the creature moved away from Jay's spray, it ran into Danny's. Once they hit it, they crossed streams and doused it, burning it up with chlorine. While they fought this one, the other one ran around, coming up fast at Trent's side. He turned, trying to aim his blowtorch, but it was too late. It picked him up and carried him back to the burning trees. Danny turned, seeing his grandfather several feet off the ground and being pulled backwards, and screamed, "Grandpa, no!" He took off running. Jay followed. When they reached the tree line, they had to stop. The heat from the fire was too much. A gust of wind sent that heat wave over them, and they scrambled back, gasping and choking. Their skin felt singed. "Get away from there!" A large, deep, authoritative voice shouted. Danny turned, seeing soldiers in gas masks running at them, followed by a slew of troops. Between the 2 teen boys and the wall of soldiers were several more creatures desperately making their way back to their ships. There was nowhere to go. "Drop down!" Rames yelled. Danny and Jay hit the ground, covering their heads. "Blowtorches only!" the major commanded. 5 soldiers ran up behind the creatures and sent out arcs of fire, catching them mid-run. They caught and burned a brilliant blue, falling forward and landing a few feet from the boys. Danny and Jay peeked up from behind their arms and saw the faces of the things as alien skin peeled back, becoming crisp and black. The smell was sickening. Jay leaned over and puked. Hands grabbed Danny and pulled him up. He kicked and screamed, fighting. "Calm down, son, it's me." The major turned him and gave him a shake. Danny tried to breathe. "My grandpa, it got him. "Which way?" Rames asked. Danny pointed into the inferno blazing out of control behind them. Rames looked and shook his head. He pulled the boys across the street and closer to the railroad tracks. From the other side, they could see a blue light within the pyre. It began to rise above the flames. Rames pulled out a radio and spoke. "This is 029er, the big dog." The radio static sputtered.
"We read you, big dog."
"Enemy flyer at 12 o'clock from my position."
"We copy."
"Scorch the earth. I repeat, scorch the earth." Rames clicked off and then pulled Danny and Jay down into the ditch. Apaches came from the south and rained fire down on the emerging orb. It happened so fast, Danny couldn't believe it. He screamed, "No! Grandpa! Grandpa!" Tears streaked down his cheeks, leaving tracks in the soot. Jay wrapped his arms around his friend and held him. The boys watched through horrified eyes as the blaze exploded outward. A blast of hot wind blew over into the grass. Rames removed his mask. He and the men watched as the mushroom cloud of fiery gases rose into the air. The sound of crackling tinder filled their ears as rain began to fall once again in earnest. No one spoke, and the minutes stretched out. Finally, the chatter on the major's radio revealed that Operation Urban Termination was a success. The enemy had been wiped out, but there was collateral damage, human casualties. Covering this up was not going to be an easy task. Rames began with the boys. He had sons of his own, and when he looked at these two, his heart constricted. The bravery they'd exhibited in the face of imminent danger and to protect those they loved was beyond courageous. It pricked his conscience, knowing he had to push that down, that he needed to make it clear by any means necessary that they were never to speak of what happened here this night. "Boys, come with me." He led them away to a transport chopper landing down the road. Exhausted, heartbroken, and grieving, Danny Edwards and Jay Hernandez followed Major Frank Rames to the Chinook, where they climbed inside, followed by 2 armed guards. The haunted looks in their eyes shook Rames, getting deep under his skin. The chopper lifted off the ground, turned, and headed to base, leaving behind the ghosts of the hopes and dreams of 2 American boys, leaving behind their childhood. Epilogue. It was 3 days before residents of Schertz were allowed to come out of their homes. Thanks to heavy rains, the chlorine gas settled into the soil. The military sent in cleanup crews to lay down agents to neutralize it before it could heat up outside and set it off again. Fire departments and rescue groups couldn't even come in until that was complete. The gas was toxic to humans, and enough had died. Finally, the National Guard, in cooperation with the fire department and EMS, worked to contain fires, rescue victims, and bag bodies. News reporters swarmed like bees at the outposts, all trying to get shots from a distance of the chaos that happened in Schertz. A massive explosion from an underground gas pocket that set off several other pockets along a geothermal fault line. This story was backed by the Army Corps of Engineers report released to the public, which explained that the blue orbs were actually gaseous masses that were spewed from the underground pockets into the atmosphere. As people gossiped with their neighbors about the events 3 nights past, Velma Richards loaded her cat Percy into her car. Percy protested being stuck inside his carrier, but she didn't have time to soothe him. She put 5 boxes of CDs and files into the trunk along with her luggage. Finally, she picked up the Herald from her driveway and got in her car. She pulled it out of the plastic wrapper and read the front page feature. An image, obviously taken from a distance, showed the local Dairy Queen burnt down to the studs. As she read the story fed to the press by the military, she came across a list of those who died. Colonel Lewis Reed, USAF, retired. Lewis Reed, Jr., president of Schertz Bank. Mayor Lloyd Webber. Chamber of Commerce President Natasha House Williams. Up-and-coming political candidate Jeff Taylor. Retired Sergeant Trent Wilkins. Mark Rivas, student. And the high school's beloved Coach Davis. There were more listed simply as missing. She tossed the paper into the back seat and started her car. "Time to move on, Percy," she said to her cat. "We have a business meeting with Entropic in 1 week." She backed out onto the street and put the car in drive. She turned up the radio. "Austin, here we come." Nettie and Henry emerged from their apartment in the retirement community, happy to finally be able to get out. It had been a long and terrifying 3 days. They got into their Impala, intent on grabbing a bite to eat. Nettie was thrilled to get a hot meal after 2 days of no electricity. Although it was finally turned on yesterday afternoon, she was just too tired to cook, so they ate peanut butter sandwiches. Everything in the fridge had to be thrown out, so lunch meat was a no-go after the first day. She read the paper while Henry drove them to their favorite barbecue joint in Cibolo. A massive underground gas pocket. Can you believe it, Henry? She pushed her glasses up onto her nose. Who knew? Henry got onto FM 78, driving slowly as they passed the now burned-out section where the old Starlight Theater used to be. Nettie stared, clucking her tongue. Such a shame. And just look what's left of the Dairy Queen. As they passed, she placed her hand on the window, sadness written in the lines on her face. Nearly to the turnoff that would take them into the sleepy little Texas town, the car jerked, sputtered, and died. Oh, for heaven's sake! Henry steered off the road and hit the brake, putting the transmission into park. He turned off the now dead engine and got out. Steam erupted from underneath the hood. He stood scratching his balding head. Nettie leaned out. "Well, what is it? What's wrong with our baby?" "Heck if I know, with all that steam." He popped the hood and backed up quick as more smoke came out. "I won't be able to check that yet. It's overheated." A car rolled to a stop behind them. A tall gentleman got out and came around to the driver's side. "You folks look like you could use some help." Henry reached out to shake his hand. "Fine of you to stop. I'm Henry Ford, and this is my wife, Nettie." "Good to meet you. Name's John Hester." The men shook, and John Hester waved at Nettie. "Hester?" she said. "As in Hester's in Marion, the meat market?" "The one and the same. Family business." John looked at the smoking engine. "Well, that's got to cool down first." "Yeah," said Henry. "Guess I'll need to give my son a call. Damn shame. Was taking Nettie out for dinner, too. We were looking forward to that after these last 3 days." "Where were you headed?" "On over to the barbecue joint in Cibolo. Ray's. My favorite. Say, I can drop you both over there. I was on my way back to Marion, and it's on the way. No need for you both to miss dinner just because of an overheated car. You can't do much about it now, but in an hour your son should be able to come look at it with you. May as well eat while you wait. You can call him from there, can't you?" Henry nodded his head and looked at Nettie. "Well, you're the boss. What do you say, my love?" Nettie chuckled and got out. "I say I'm hungry." She walked over to stand by the men. "Thank you kindly, Mr. Hester. We'll take you up on that offer of a ride." John put his hand on her shoulder. "Please call me John." He swept his hand in front of himself. "After you, ma'am." "Thank you then, John." Nettie led the way. Henry opened her door, and John Hester climbed into the driver's seat. Henry had to sit in the back, squeezing in next to a box of beef jerky. Is that you all's famous beef jerky?" The smell was mouth-watering. "Sure is. I make it myself. On my way to drop it off now." John looked at Henry in the rear-view mirror. "You all go on ahead and grab one. My treat." "Don't mind if I do." Henry picked one up and handed it over the seat to Nettie. "Oh, Lord, you done gone and did it now, John. This is Henry's favorite." John chuckled. Henry bit into his, chewing like a happy cow on cud. "Delicious. What's your secret, John?" John laughed, driving past the turnoff to Ray's. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Henry. Say, you all from Schertz? I think you missed the turn, John. Nettie looked left, pointing. John kept on talking amiably, unconcerned. Y'all been taking advantage of those free annual shots? Mr. Hester, you missed the turn. Henry sat forward. John Hester leaned down and reached under seat. The driver of the car behind him thought he saw a flash from inside the vehicle. But as it continued on straight without veering, he disregarded the notion, thinking it was probably a reflection of the sun setting off the windshield. On the other side of the road, Henry and Nettie's car cooled down. It sat there for a week before police had it towed and began investigating. So what happened to Henry and Nettie Ford? With no clues, no witnesses, it became yet another missing person case, among thousands in the area dating back half a century. The end. Stay tuned for the thrilling epic conclusion to the Harvest Trilogy. Book 3, Census. Coming soon to audio. Census. Marion, Texas, population 3,700, is so small, if you blink driving through it, you'll miss it. One area business owner is awarded Tastiest Meats in Town by the Chamber of Commerce. John Hester's family-owned meat market is a staple in the region. Respected by the locals, he is above reproach. When he befriends new residents, retired 9/11 firefighter Jack Callahan, things get weird. Stranger still are the disappearing residents and unsolved cold cases Callahan discovers as he and his wife try to settle in. When they begin receiving veiled threats from the Reverend Harcourt Kane warning them to leave, Jack must find a way to protect himself and his wife and help the FBI solve the mystery of the 50 years of census that never budges. Check out more from Michelle E. Gwynn. Visit michelleegwynnauthor.com. This has been Hybrids, Harvest Trilogy Volume 2, written by Michelle E. Gwynn, narrated by Lawrence D. Yaklin. Copyright 2015 by Michelle E. Gwynn. Production copyright 2016 by Michelle E. Gwynn.